The gas station grew from the mist as I approached, the lights blooming in the fog as it materialized. The opening chords to Queen's Somebody to Love floated from the radio, and I turned it off. I left the nozzle in the tank and walked into the ammonia soak box that made up the main building. The clerk was reading a magazine behind the desk. He didn't look up at the ringing of the bell mounted on the door, or even at my picking up 2 Kit Kats. It wasn't until I laid them on the counter that his dark, lazy gaze swept up to me. "Is that it?" he asked. "Yeah, I pay for the gas at the pump." He nodded and rang the bars up. 3.89. I laid a 5 on the counter. Most of the paint was gone from money sliding back and forth. The man settled back on his stool as he handed me my change. "Where are you headed, fella?" He asked it casually, but I felt he probably knew the answer. "New River." He nodded slowly. "Not much up that way anymore." "Visiting someone?" "No, I'm doing a study on the preacher's house." It wasn't a question, but I nodded. He looked out the window, his jaw moving like he was chewing on his words. The rain beat down gently on the aluminum roof, undercutting the pop music with a gentle tapping noise. "Yeah, what about it?" "I'd wait till the rain let up if I was you." I cocked my head. "Why?" His jaw made that same movement again, and I wondered what battle was going on in his head as he slid his hands into his hoodie pocket. "I just would." He looked me up and down. "People up there won't be happy to see you. Your type." I adjusted my glasses, knowing the answer before I asked. "My type." He chewed the words. "You know what I mean?" "I do. I'm doing a thesis project on the house." He shuffled his feet. "You're gonna think I'm stupid, man, but take some advice. Don't go up there." I've heard the stories, so I reassured him. He looked at me, and his face changed from apprehension to something resembling pity. I extended my hand over the counter. "My name's Josh." He shook it with a hand much more callous than mine. "Renard." "What an interesting name." "It's nice to meet you, Renard." He nodded. Everything about the man could be described as quiet. All of his movements were small and slow. His t-shirt and jeans were earthy, somber colors. Even his eyes were a muted shade of green. "If you really need to, tell them you talk to me, but only if you really, and I mean really need to. Like if someone starts giving you trouble or something, I'll have a whole mess of trouble if people find out I'm talking to you." I hesitated for a moment. "Will they? Give me trouble? I mean, probably not. Nobody ever goes up there, especially not in the rain. Down here, though." "Well, why not the rain?" I asked. Instead of answering, he glanced at the ring on my finger. I wondered if I was going to have to go through this song and dance yet again. "She's dead," I said flatly. After a moment, he answered. I expected as much. I cocked my head questioningly. "How nice day," he said, picking up his magazine again. Back in the car, I pulled my tape recorder from my bag and flicked on the record switch. It wasn't for serious notes, but more for general themes and feelings. The professor had recommended it to help us keep track of our feelings and ideas as we collected the materials for our thesis. I met a man in the gas station on the edge and I looked around, trying to figure out what to call it. "The general area." He asked where I was going and tried to dissuade me from it. He gave me his name as Renard and said to use it if anyone gives me any trouble. He also told me that they wouldn't be happy to see my type. I flicked the recorder off and after a moment back on. It's hard to imagine this place ever being sunny. Since it's October, said the professor, I decided we'd focus on some of the darker aspects of folklore. I know you've all been surely enjoying learning all about quilting, but we'll take a break from that wonderful subject to do a little, something a bit more spooky. He bounced on the word spooky. "Dear?" James had a way of lecturing where he would often put his hands behind his back and lean or bend in time with his lectures, occasionally bouncing up a little to punctuate the end of sentences here and there. He was in rare form that day. Rather than focus on the largest examples that you all know and have surely heard about 1,000 times, I thought it'd be interesting to give you some less well-known examples of spooky folklore. The Preacher House was the third after a haunted bridge somewhere in Ohio and the Goat Man somewhere in Tennessee. The third was also in Tennessee, and the PowerPoint showed a yellowed photograph picturing the brick foundation of a home with 3 walls still partially standing and the chimney still jutting into the air. Now the preacher house is a little-known ruin set up in the hills. It's not too west from here, actually. The problem is, well, he smiled and swiveled to face the class, very pleased with himself. Well, we know very little about it. The first mention of it was recorded from the Folk Studies Department at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, but there was no mention of how old the original building was or what exactly was supposed to be wrong with the place. Tourists were warned away from it, but as it's close to Highway 116, it's been difficult to keep people away from the place. He changed a slide, and there was a general shuffling as every person in the lecture hall shifted in their chair to lean forward. The new slide pictured a large underground structure with murals painted on the walls, though the photos were so grainy and yellowed with age that it was hard to see what exactly the murals were supposed to be depicting. Now you see the interesting part. When a group of students from the university went to investigate it some 20 years ago, they found a hatch leading beneath the old house and a large cave cut into the hillside with these murals painted on them. They had planned to do more testing, and this was when I myself was still in middle school, mind you. Supposedly, they were contacted by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and told that it was some type of crime scene that needed to be investigated and that they needed to stop. All of that, naturally, has combined together to leave us with a very spooky, he bounced on the word again, mystery surrounding these old ruins that, at least according to locals, no one is supposed to ever go near. Cedar Creek didn't materialize out of the mist like the gas station, but instead spread out below when I crested a hill like rooftops afloat in a sea of lazy mist. The preacher's house was on the other side of town, and as I drove through the wet, quiet streets, I looked at the decaying town. If broken, boarded-up windows had been in vogue, then Cedar Creek would have been the pinnacle of fashion. But as it were, a quiet, proud desperation slunk between the buildings and crossed the cracked streets, somehow more tangible even than the mist or the rain. I stopped at a red light beside a diner that probably had dirt and the grout that was older than me, and tried to ignore all the pale, sunken faces in the windows watching my car. I still felt their eyes boring into me long after I had left the town again and ascended once more into the hills. The preacher's house sat alone in a meadow half a mile down a dirt RD, backed sharply by a steep rise up to the mountains. Thin, wispy grass had grown waist-high around the fragments of wall, with only a single tree in what might be considered the house's yard. Wind sent ripples through the grass, always moving from the edges inward toward the house. Everything was a little grayer than the pictures, but I hardly noticed that at first, since my eye was drawn to something so out of place that it might have been comical if it didn't give off such a threatening feeling. In front of the house, some 10 feet from the closest fragment of wall, someone had sat an old stand payphone, the kind painted blue on the sides. I walked toward it slowly, with that familiar feeling of wondering if I might be the butt of someone's strange joke. Still, no camera crews jumped out of the bushes or anything as I reached it, and I picked up the phone, only to hear silence. Of course, I had expected silence, but I felt a strange sense of disappointment at it. I hung it back up on the receiver, then, as an experiment, pushed the thing slightly. The thing was so top-heavy that with only that slight push, it toppled over into the grass with a wet metallic clanging noise. I looked around, still waiting for some kind of punchline, but all that came was a cold gust of wind. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and clicked the record button. Someone seems to have put, and I'm not joking here, a whole damn payphone up here. It's not connected to anything, and it doesn't work, but I can't imagine a reason for it being here. Even as a prank, it seems weird. I might ask around town about it. A whole damn payphone. Like what? I stepped over the phone and walked up the small weed-choked path to the remainder of the brick house that had once stood there, now no more than 3 pieces of wall and a chimney. I stepped through what had once been the door and wandered to the other side, where I knew the entrance lay to the more interesting part of the place. The door was like those that lead down to cellars, set at an angle, descending into the ground. The wood was warped with large gaps between the boards and seemed to be held together entirely by the thick iron band that encircled each of the doors. Both I and the door groaned together as I managed to haul the heavy thing up and past its center of gravity, where it swung back on its rusted hinges and after a single, else lay still. Warm, thick air emanated from the open hole, smelling of wet earth and stone. The stairs that led downward weren't wood or even metal, but chiseled pieces of slate jammed into the earth. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and shined it down into the yawning tunnel, but there was only darkness and nothing more. As I descended, the damp of the rain gave way, and the air became softer and drier. Then, without any kind of forewarning, the stairs ended, leaving me standing at the exit to the tunnel's bottom, staring into a darkness that seemed thicker somehow and almost alive. I turned the flashlight up and into what people refer to as the bunker, but the light just stretched off into more darkness, and I had to tread some ways before the beam reached the far wall. I experienced, then, one of those feelings that happens when, even though you're expecting something, it still manages to surprise you. It's rather like seeing the Grand Canyon. We've all seen pictures of it, and yet seeing it in person still leaves you a bit breathless. The mural painted there was beautiful. That must be stated first. It wasn't some crude drawing, a product of a hand that must have spent many, many years perfecting its craft. The painting showed a woodland scene with a stream running through the center, with squirrels and foliage ridiculously detailed for their size, for the scene covered the whole 10-foot-high wall, leaving the squirrels in the foreground standing at some 2 or 3 feet tall. As my eyes adjusted, though, I saw the real reason for the preacher house's reputation. The dark, shadowy figures hiding between the trees, devoid of any kind of detail to humanize them. They were simply outlined voids that were vaguely human-shaped, painted gray and black, like someone had blocked them out to paint, but just never got around to finishing them. The ones in the background were maybe 2 feet tall, while the ones closest to the front of the painting would have stood at some 8 feet tall. I stared at one of them for a moment. I knew there were 2 other murals covering the walls to the left and right, and the realization that those murals too were populated with these featureless entities filled me with a sudden dread that left me with the urge to be anywhere, and I mean anywhere else. I took a deep breath and waited for the feeling to pass before taking a cursory look at the other 2 murals, an island scene on the left and a small farm at the foot of a large forest at the other. When I touched the wall, I found it didn't have the plasticky smooth feeling of acrylics, but still felt like plain rock, as if the rock itself had been dyed to create the murals rather than painted on. I noted my first impressions on the tape recorder. Finally, I added, walking back to the forest mural. One of the most curious effects of the paintings is that between their detail and size and the sheer darkness down here, it's almost impossible to get a true measure on them. When I look left, I see something to the right I didn't see earlier, and when I look right to pay attention to that new thing, something on the left catches my eye again. It's such a strange trick of the eye. It creates this feeling of things appearing in the painting as you simply take in such a large amount of detail from so close up. The town's library was an old 2-story building, sandwiched between and sharing walls with 2 apartments. The plaque outside told me that the building had apparently at one time been home to the town's newspaper, but didn't say much else. The librarian was an ancient-looking woman whose glasses were so thick they could have doubled as binoculars and wore a perfume that smelled of wilted lavender. The library itself had only front windows, and the only light inside the place was the librarian's desk lamp, illuminating some old ledger that she looked up from to glare at me. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes." I'm looking for, anything you have in the preacher's house." I didn't know until that moment that an empty library could grow somehow more silent, and yet it did. The rain even seemed to slacken, like it decided it would take a stroll down the street and come back after all this unpleasantness was over. Well, which preacher? Preacher Hancock's place? Preacher Campbell? Or we got Preacher Gamble's house over? No, I said, holding up a hand and cutting her off. I mean, the preacher house. She'd well known what I meant the first time, and we both knew that. "Don't know the place," she said, turning her attention back to the ledger. "How nice day. I'm just looking for any records about when it was built or who its owners might have been, or anything like that." Her only answer was to continue staring pointedly at the ledger. "Please, I'm not looking to cause trouble or anything. I promise." She still didn't look up. I sighed and turned to leave, but I only got a step before I remembered something. It wasn't exactly an emergency or anything, and it seemed a long shot, but I didn't really have much to lose at this point. I turned back to the desk. Renard told me it was okay. She didn't move for a moment, but her jaw worked furiously as she ground her teeth. When she did look up, it was an angry acceptance rather than any kind of helpfulness. She pushed back from the table with alarming agility for someone so old and marched off into the gloom, muttering something that sounded angry. The sound of it moved through the shelves and up the old spiral staircase at the back of the place, then over my head before making its way back. In her hand, she held a battered old folio with a typed label that said, "Preacher Family Records." "You stay right here with it," she said pointedly. "You can sit at that table over there." A part of me wanted to joke that she wouldn't be able to stop me if I wanted to take it with me. But something told me not only would she not find it funny, but it very well might be entirely wrong. I sat down at one of the long tables close to the windows and flicked on the desk lamp, then opened the folio. It took me some time to sort through the stack of documents. Most were yellowed and thin with age, and carried a smell of dust and mold. Some were so frail, I was afraid to handle them with anything other than my fingertips, lest they crumble. The documents traced the births and deaths of the Preacher clan for just over 100 years, but detailed little else besides. The last record I found was a deed given to one Jedediah Preacher, dated 1890. In the general area of the Preacher house, there was absolutely nothing regarding what led to its current state. I took the folio back up to the librarian and thanked her. She didn't even look up. I rented a motel room at a long one-story hotel wrapped around a parking lot. This one situated at a small dark bend on the road leading from town, surrounded by old-growth cedar trees. I walked in and turned on the lamp, only to find the television didn't work and the heater only had one setting. I pulled my chair into the door and sat there, moving it backward or forward when I got hot or cold. I sat and listened to the rain patter off the aluminum roof and the bed of crushed cedar needles. I stared into the dark woods, spinning my wedding ring on my finger and waiting. After my usual 2 hours of sleep, I woke up with no idea what I was going to do next for my thesis, which is why I was more excited than disturbed when I found that someone had slipped a note under my door that read simply Cedar of Cedar Creek vs. Alton Bransbury. After a coffee, I made my way through the chilly, sprawling hallways of the courthouse until I found the records department and asked for the case. The archivist, a small old man with wire-rimmed spectacles much too large for his face, frowned heavily when I asked him, but nevertheless led me down to the archives reading room. At the end of a long yellowed hallway that smelled of ammonia and buzzed with the sound of failing fluorescent lights. The room itself was small and carpeted, with only an old steel table and chair inside. He brought me the folio and left silently. The case concerned Alton Bransbury, a local shop clerk who, at least according to the records, burned the preacher's house to its current state in November 1912. From the records, it seemed that the trial was less to determine whether or not Bransbury was guilty or not, since he'd been found standing beside the charred ruins with a can of gasoline and singe marks on his clothes, but more to determine whether he was mentally competent enough to actually be tried by the court. The state doctor that examined Bransbury ultimately wrote in a letter to the court that while Bransbury doesn't carry the demeanor of a paranoiac or have many of the telltale signs of a nervous disorder, I still must declare him mentally incompetent due in large part to his strange delusions of shadow men and the disturbing reason he gave for his actions. Those disturbing reasons were recorded later in the judge's written opinion after the verdict. Due to Mr. Bransbury's firm belief that the Preacher family homestead was inhabited by some kind of evil spirits, I must concur with the opinions of both the defendant's private doctor and the one supplied by the court, with that opinion being that Mr. Bransbury is not competent to stand trial or face punishment for his actions at this time. While one could be forgiven for mistaking Mr. Bransbury's capacity for lucidity from his easy manner and good speech, his accounts of what led him to ultimately set the fatal fire that killed the Preacher family point unquestionably toward an addled mind. Those accounts referencing shadowy figures standing outside his house that spoke to him with the voice of his recently deceased son. When he followed these figures, he ended up at the home of the Preachers. This happened, according to him, for some months, and led him to his ultimate pronouncement that this place was in his word. Words cursed. Whether his condition is a result of the death of his son, some deficiency brought on by age, or a weak constitution, or some other cause, I truly believe that it would be a mistake to condemn a man so clearly divorced from the reality of his actions. There remains the possibility of a post-cure trial, but I imagine he will remain a ward of the state for the rest of his days. Signed, Honorable Judge John Oppenheimer. While Mr. Bransbury's own statement was also included in the folio. I've elected to not include it here due to it, shall we say, opaque nature. The handwriting changes multiple times throughout the document, becoming nigh unreadable at times. And there are breaks between paragraphs that leave one with a feeling of having skipped several pages in a book that also changed languages while you weren't looking. And there, in that small little reading room at the back of a cold, clammy courthouse, was the first time I saw it. Perhaps it was an itch on the back of my neck, or something just barely caught through the corner of my eye. But I got this sense that something wasn't right. I looked up to see a dark figure standing just through the window, set in the door. It didn't disappear, but stood there as I watched. I knew, as I still know, that even though the figure had no features and no eyes to speak of, that it was, nonetheless, watching me. I knew that it could see me just as well as I could see it. And we sat like that, me at the little desk in the little room, standing in the doorway, watching each other in a silence so thick it might have been water and drowned us both. Strangely, that first time I wasn't necessarily scared. No, it was more like my body was waiting for me to give it some cue. After some moments, the figure turned slowly and walked back down the long hallway before entering the shadows by the stairs and disappearing from sight. When it was gone, I took a deep breath and flicked on the recorder. Unsure of what to do next, I drove back to the gas station I'd encountered when I first drove in. Though the fog wasn't quite as bad as the day before, the station still seemed to materialize from it the second before I passed the turnoff. Not a soul was there, but the clerk, the same one as before, reading a weathered old paperback while Hank Williams played on the speakers. He looked up when I walked in. "Hiya. Doing all right, Renard?" I asked. He shrugged and looked at me flatly. "Better than you, by the looks of it." The frankness of the reply caught me like a slap. "I look that bad. You don't look good." I frowned at him. There was something about the clerk that looked intensely, well, maybe not old. Worn might be a better word for it. It was something in the eyes that gave them the impression of lights shining out from a deep cave. "I wanted to ask you some questions, if that's okay?" I asked. "Why me?" "Well, if I'm honest, nobody else here really seems to want anything to do with me." "I told you they wouldn't." "I know, but why?" "I found out some about the house. I read the court records about that Bransbury guy burning it down. I haven't found anything about the bunker underneath, or even any mention of it so far. I was wondering if you could tell me what the locals say about it." He didn't seem at all surprised by the fact I'd read the court case, and I had suspicion that it was him who had slipped the piece of paper beneath my hotel door. "We don't go up there," he said. "That's what we say about it. We tell other people not to go up there." "But why? Has anything happened to people that go up there? I mean, someone has to go up there. Someone hauled a whole damn payphone up there." Renard sat his book on the counter and smoothed out the cover. He looked up at me, and the expression of sheer hopelessness that covered his face almost caused me to recoil. "What's the point? You're not going to listen. And if you listen, you won't believe it. And if you believe it, you'll think it won't happen to you. Same thing all of you do when you come here." He rubbed his forehead with the tips of his fingers, pressing so hard it left red splotches on the skin. "Just go home. For once. Just," he sighed, "just listen." I gave him a moment before I asked again, "What happens to people at the preacher's house?" His fingers still pressed into his forehead. His face was entirely covered from view when he answered. "They just don't come back. So they just vanish." He nodded. For a bit, there was only the sound of Hank Williams floating above us and the hum of the soda refrigerator. When he finally spoke, it was in a low voice, like he was afraid to let the words out into the world. "When I was little, they told us stories whenever someone died. We were always told to ignore the voices in the woods. They'd gather all the kids up and tell us. Then they'd tell us again. Then they'd make us repeat it to them. Then repeat it again. And it happened every time someone died. The same message, don't talk to them. Don't do what they say." "What did they say?" I asked him. "Have you ever heard of them?" He looked out the gas station's windows towards the thick woods across the road, barely more than a dark splotch through the mist. "I don't hear them. Sometimes they're out there, though." He pointed toward the road. I thought of the black figure I'd seen standing inside the courthouse. They attract people, he said, his voice growing even quieter, so I had to lean in to make out the words. I don't know how. People find out about the place, though, always when they're at their worst, and they come looking. He looked down, and I followed his gaze to my wedding ring. He looked back up, and the silent implication was clear. A large truck pulled into the station, belching black smoke from its tailpipe. You need to leave. People can't think I'm talking to you. But you told me to tell people I talked to you. I said only if you really, really needed to. I'd rather not have my tires slashed if I can help it. Thanks. Please go. The panic in his face told me that he was being serious, so I quickly laid $1 around the counter and walked out with a bag of chips and a Coke. The 2 men in the truck watched me sullenly. I waved at them, and one of them spit out the window. Later that night, I finally called my mom. Since the phones inside the rooms also didn't work, I used a payphone beside the office. She was glad to hear from me, and if I'm honest, I felt guilty for not calling her sooner. I could almost hear her nose wrinkling through the phone as she went. What on earth are you doing all the way down there? I'm writing my thesis on a house down here. It's a neat little place. Wouldn't put it past them to shoot you. You know how people are, down there. Yeah, Mom. Have you decided what you're going to do with this master's degree now that you're about to have it? And just like that, the conversation traveled down a path worn smooth by so many comings and goings. I looked out into the rainy parking lot. The single street lamp in the middle barely stretched to the woods all around us, turning everything a slight shade of orange. Not yet, Mom. She sighed. I know, Mom. I'm not going to start. I know better. You'll do what you'll do, and I've already made my feelings about this very clear. I waited for the beat of silence that always followed before she continued. But I do wish you'd just come home. She kept on, but her voice trailed off from me as I continued to look out at the parking lot and started to notice the dark shapes standing at the edges of the light, like outlines of tall people that hadn't been filled in. None of them moved, and I wasn't sure if they'd been standing there the whole time or had simply materialized from the dark mist like the gas station. Are you even listening to me? She snapped. Sorry, Mom, someone was telling me they needed to use the phone. There was an impatient huff. There's not even more than one phone at the hotel. What kind of horror day in are you at? I gotta go, Mom. He needs to use the phone. Well, just call me tomorrow if you can. I miss you and your dad misses you, Josh. Gina's parents ask about you. Oh well. I hung up the phone before the conversation could reach the point where she started with the aphorisms. I walked to the edge of the covered awning that ran the length of the little motel and looked at the dark figure standing there. I took my phone from my pocket and slowly waved. They didn't wave back. I walked back to my room. Inside, I took my tape recorder from my pocket and clicked the record, but instead of speaking into it, I laid it on the little table beside the bed and did my best to sleep. I spent the next day with that acerbic old woman poring over the library's collections, which consisted almost entirely of old journals, diaries, and handwritten store ledgers. While the ledgers were of little interest, even in a single day, I found perhaps a dozen references recorded in various diaries, all following the pattern Renard described. A death followed by the voices. One woman recorded how glad she was that she didn't have kids after her husband's death because his voice outside her bedroom windows was almost too much for her. An adult to bear, and she couldn't imagine a child being able to sit all night through such a thing. Another account from one Mrs. Lanesbury recorded that after the death of her newborn, she and her husband would cover their heads with pillows and blankets each night for weeks to smother the sound of crying coming from the woods. Perhaps the most chilling account I read occurred from a man whose wife and 2 children perished in a fire that consumed his farmhouse. While he stayed with his neighbors, the man and his host would hear the voices of his wife and children. Outside the house, but above them in the house's attic, I recorded as many of them as I could in that day, under the disapproving glances of that ancient crone, until my back and neck hurt from bending over and my fingers cramped from writing. I stayed until she tapped me on the shoulder with a slimy smile perched on her face like a bat. I'm afraid you'll have to leave, she said with all the sorrow of a lottery winner. Don't you know the library closes at 7? I blinked at her. If only there was someone that worked here who could have informed me. The bat that made up her smile ruffled its wings a bit as her eyes fell on my engagement ring. I'm sure your wife must have the patience of a ST to tolerate your charming conversation every night. Everyone's patient when they're dead. There's a sick joy in seeing people backpedal when they realize they've just spoken ill of the dead. It's a distinct kind of shame that cows have even the prickliest personality and send most people into a stammering fit. I could see, even as I said it, that the old woman wasn't most people, though, and I got the distinct impression as she stood there smiling at me, that she had lost the capacity for shame long before I was even born. Whether she had lost it amidst the cutthroat business of small-town gossip and intrigue, or it had simply been slowly pressed from her by the weight of the years, I couldn't say, but she didn't waver a second before she replied, "Lucky her for dinner." I stopped at a small rain-soaked diner, close to the edge of town with those old-fashioned red stools at the bar. The place smelled of must and old fat, and was unbearably warm despite the old windows. It was tinged slightly yellow from years of soaking up nicotine. The cook held an unlit cigar in his mouth that he swiveled from one side to the other like a pendulum. He didn't glare at me or scowl, but simply watched me out of the corner of his eye, turning between me and the old television in the corner, like he couldn't figure out which might be more entertaining. I plugged headphones into my tape recorder to listen to the recording of the night before, but the only noise was my own snoring. The longer I listened, the more of that feeling I felt. It was the same that I'd felt when I picked up that phone outside the preacher's house. A sort of nervous apprehension mixed with something like hope. Again, though, there was nothing, and the old cook gently sat the burger down at my table with a sound no louder than the rain pattering down outside. I dipped a fry in ketchup and looked out the window, already knowing what I'd seen. The parking lot was a cracked old thing with potholes that could swallow a child. The only light was a floodlight bolted to the front of the building, and at the edge of its reach. I saw them there again. Come on, I thought. Say something. Let me hear it. I turned to find the cook watching me intently with that same blank expression on his face, and I realized I'd been muttering the words I was thinking. I looked at him, looked pointedly at the figure standing in the rain, and then back at him. He raised a thick, calloused finger in front of his lips, then slowly shook his head. That night, I again sat the tape recorder beside my bed. The rain had slowed to a thin misting, but the air was so heavy and wet that the cold night soaked into my bones, and I couldn't get warm even in the heat of the room. I laid in the dark, shivering, until I heard the gentle knocks. There were 3 of them at a time, not fast or slow, not hard or gentle. They were just there. I threw the covers from my shivering legs and padded across to the door. I had the deadbolt engaged and the chain locked in its place. I placed my ear to the cold wood. "Gina?" I asked. The knocking ceased in the middle of a sequence. Again, that strange feeling of a dreadful kind of hope flooded my mind, and again, there was no reply. The only noise at all, besides the splat of rain dripping from the awning, was a kind of static noise that swelled and pulsed like a television in a power surge. I unlocked the deadbolt, thinking I might peek through the crack in the door allowed by the chain lock. I turned the knob, ready to crack the door open, when something stayed in my hand. It was an old fear, like the cedar trees were old growth. It was the feeling of facing something beyond my ken in every way, shape, and form, like a caveman watching an eclipse. It made my heart start to race, even as it made each beat painful. Instead of opening the door, I placed my palms against the wood and held it fast, bracing against a push that never came. The knocking never resumed, and when I finally gathered the courage to peek through the window, there was once again nothing. I walked outside, but there was no voice or ghostly laughter. There was nothing but the rain and the hum of the street lamp. There were no marks on the ground and no people about. Even the figures at the edge of the woods were gone. That was when I felt something wet on my cheek, and found that, to my surprise, I was crying. The next morning, I woke to find another note, this one taped to my hotel door. It read, "Mr. Hollins, we're afraid that due to complaints from other guests, we're unable to accommodate you any longer. Please vacate by the usual checkout time. We're sorry for any inconvenience this may cause. In other words, since you can't leave shit alone, get out." I was already planning on leaving that day, but it never feels good to be kicked out of somewhere. The lady at the front desk wouldn't even look at me while she checked me out. Hell, she didn't even speak. She just meekly reached for my key and gave me a receipt. Then again, maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe she just had some really interesting shoes. While I loaded my bags back into the car, I noticed something that sent a different kind of shiver down my spine. I just slammed the trunk and turned around to stretch my back when I noticed that, out of about 11 rooms in the hotel, 6 of them had people in the windows. Actual people with actual human features, all watching me. They didn't look particularly angry or scared, but they had a back the way you came to look. It wasn't exactly angry, but it's the look you get when you get lost on a country road and have to stop and ask for directions. Where's Interstate 10? Back the way you came. Where can I find a payphone? Back the way you came. I drove away from the old hotel. The clouds were finally beginning to break, and a morning sky was peeking out blue from between them. It was only late morning, but was already warm enough for me to roll the windows down one of the last warm days of autumn. It amazed me how different the place looked in the sunshine. The houses were still old, with peeling paint and dark windows, but in the sun, they did have a lazy, comfortable kind of charm to them. That charm pervaded the whole town as I drove through. Old Brick always looks warm in the sunlight, and despite boarded-up windows and the uneven streets, I found myself driving slower to savor the trip through the town. As I ascended into the mountains once again, I was unsure whether everything I'd experienced might have been some dream, or maybe some weird mental break. Then again, though, monsters are always easy to laugh at in the sunshine. When I emerged from the little cobs of trees that separated the preacher's house from the road, I saw that someone or something had stood the payphone upright once again. There was still mud coating one side of it where I'd pushed it over. In the birdsong and the crisp rustling of dying leaves, I stood in front of it for a long moment, trying to decide just how much to indulge in a fantasy that I knew deep in my heart wouldn't help me. Then I picked up the phone. Gina? Nothing. I hung it back up and walked over to the stairs leading down to the so-called bunker. The door was still resting open on its hinges. The light didn't reach far down the steep stairs, but it reached far enough to just barely illuminate the dark figures standing inside. They watched me, and I watched them, and a silent invitation was exchanged. They knew what I wanted, and I knew what they wanted. They were smart enough to know that for others, the voice was the bait. They were smart enough to know that for me, it was the prize. I didn't take my eyes off them as I pulled the door closed, dropping it into place with the sound of rusted hinges and a loud bang. I walked back to the car, the birdsong still filling the quiet little clearing, and sat in my car for a long time, just crying. The final drive through town was slow, and I stopped for coffee at a little shop. The girl behind the counter asked if I was okay, and I told her I was. The gas station didn't materialize this time, but rolled up as I crested the hill. I waved out the window as I passed. I don't know if Renard saw it. He was probably reading his book. He probably didn't even look up. I like to think he did. Then he saw I listened to him. But then again, I've always been prone. 2 flights of fancy. There are things I've witnessed that no one back home will believe, not even my buddies who served. Every Marine has stories of patrols gone sideways. Weird locals or nights on watch when you'd swear you heard something that wasn't there. But those stories, as wild as they are, don't touch what I've seen, the kind of things that won't fit in any report. You learn quickly in the field what can be explained and what can't, but nothing ever prepares you for the moment you stop asking what is it and just focus on surviving it. The first time it happened, I was stationed in Afghanistan. We were sent to secure a remote village near the mountains, one of those places you won't find on any map. It was me, 3 others from my squad, and a local interpreter named Kareem. The village had gone silent, and we were tasked with figuring out why. Radio contact was sketchy at best, so we were essentially on our own. The intel was vague, reports of missing livestock, strange lights in hills, and rumors of something cursed driving people away. The hike was uneventful, but as we got closer, the terrain started feeling wrong. The air didn't carry the smells of life I'd grown used to in these parts. No goats, no cooking fires, nothing. Just dry earth and stale wind. Kareem was jittering, muttering prayers under his breath. I thought it was the usual nerves, but I caught him glancing at the mountains often, like he was expecting something to be watching us. When we reached the village, it was empty. Not abandoned, empty. Pots sat on stoves, half-cooked meals inside. Clothes hung from lines, stiff with dust. It was like everyone had just vanished. We spread out, looking for any signs of a struggle. But there wasn't a single mark of violence. No blood, no bodies, not even a damn footprint in the dirt. That's when the first rule came. Don't look past the ridge line after dark. Kareem was the one who told us, his voice low like he didn't want the mountains to hear. If you see something moving out there at night, pretend you don't. It's not for you to know, he'd said, not elaborating. And honestly, I thought it was just more local superstition, but something in his tone stuck with me. Like he'd already decided we wouldn't make it out. We set up in what looked like the village elder's house, sturdier than the others, with thick stone walls and a solid door. I volunteered for the first time. Sitting outside under the open sky, I scanned the ridge line through my scope. The moonlight made the barren peaks seem almost alive, with jagged rocks casting long shapes that seemed to shift. When you weren't looking directly at them, the first couple hours were quiet, and then I saw movement, a flicker at the edge of my vision. Something darted between the rocks quickly and low to the ground. I trained my rifle on the spot, waiting, but it didn't show itself again. I told myself it was a jackal or some other animal, but the way it moved fast, almost like it was crawling, set my teeth on the ranch. I didn't mention it when I handed off to Hernandez for the next watch. He was one of those guys who could joke through anything, and I didn't want to give him ammo to bust my chops. But when I woke up to the sound of the door slamming, Hernandez wasn't laughing. He locked himself inside and refused to open up until morning. I don't know what the hell I saw, right? He muttered when we pressed him. He wouldn't look at us, just kept glancing at the door like he expected something to break through. That's when Kareem spoke up again. The ridgeline, he'd said. Did you look? Hernandez nodded, his face pale. Kareem cursed under his breath and said we needed to leave because they know we're here now. We didn't leave. Orders were orders, and we weren't going to bail on a mission because of some creepy local legends. We spent the day scouring the village for anything that might explain what happened to the people. No luck. By sundown, the tension was thick enough to choke on. That night, I took my last watch around 0300. I heard the scraping. It started to faint, like wind dragging loose branches across the ground. But it got louder, closer. I strained my eyes, trying to spot the source, but the darkness beyond the village seemed to swallow the light, and then it stopped. The silence was worse. Every instinct screamed at me to wake the others, but something froze me in place, and that's when I heard it. A low guttural. Clicking, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It came from the far edge of the village, near one of the crumbling huts. Slowly, I swung my rifle in that direction, finger on the trigger. The thing that crawled out of the hut. It was wrong. It moved like a spider. Its head was oversized, with hollow eyes that reflected the faint green glow of my scope. I didn't fire. I couldn't. It was like my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. The thing cocked its head at me, its jaw unhinging, and then it scuttled back into the hut, faster than anything that size should move. By the time I woke the other, Kareem didn't seem surprised. You didn't shoot, he'd said. It wasn't a question. The hell was I supposed to shoot at? I snapped back. He didn't answer, just muttering something about the second one. If it doesn't act human, don't treat it like one. After that, we stopped sleeping in shifts. If something was out there, we figured it was better to face it together that night. We barricaded ourselves in the elder's house and sat with our backs to the walls, weapons ready. Around midnight, the whisper started, faint at first, like someone speaking just out of earshot. None of us said a word, but I could see the others straining to listen. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps on the door. We froze. Another knock, slower this time. Who? Who's there? Hernandez called out, his voice shaky. No answer. Just a third knock, softer, almost hesitant. Kareem stood and grabbed his rifle, motioning for us to stay back. He opened the door a crack and peered out, then slammed it shut, his face wide as a sheet. It's not real, he said. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, don't open the door again. We didn't ask what he saw. By morning, we were ready to get out. Radio or no radio, we decided to hike back to base and report what we'd found or hadn't found. But when we stepped outside, the village wasn't the same. The houses were still there, but the layout was different. Paths that should have led to the main road twisted into narrow alleys that looped back on themselves. Landmarks we'd marked on the map were gone. It was like the village had shifted overnight, rearranging itself into a maze. And that's when Kareem told us the third rule. Once you enter a place like this, it doesn't let you leave the same way. I wanted to punch him for not telling us sooner, but the fear in his eyes kept me from saying anything. He didn't know how to get us out any more than we did. By now, we were running low on supplies, water was rationed, and the only food we had left was a couple of MREs. We spent the day trying to find a road out, but no matter which direction we walked, we always ended up back at the elder's house that night. We heard the laughter. It started as a single voice, high-pitched and childlike, echoing from somewhere in the distance. Then more joined in a chorus of giggles that didn't sound human. Kareem made us sit in a circle, our backs to each other. He said we couldn't let them see our faces. That was the fourth rule. Never make eye contact. I don't know how long we sat there, listening to the laughter grow louder and closer. At some point, I thought I felt something brush against my leg, but I didn't dare look. When the laughter finally stopped, it was like a weight lifted off my chest. Hernandez wasn't so lucky. We found him slumped against the wall, his eyes wide open and unblinking. He didn't respond when we shook him, and his breathing was shallow. Kareem checked him over, said he was alive, but his pupils were blown, like he'd seen something too much for his mind to handle. By the fifth day, Kareem was gone. I woke up to find his rifle and pack still in the corner, but no sign of him. The village was quieter than usual, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint sound of the wind. I tried carrying Hernandez, but he was dead weight. His body was warm, but he wouldn't eat, drink, or speak. He just stared at nothing, his lips moving silently, like he was repeating something only he could hear. That night I saw the lights. They appeared one by one, floating above the ridge line like lanterns. They started moving toward the village, weaving through the air in slow, deliberate patterns. As they got closer, I could make out shapes within the lights. Twisted figures. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. The sound of my own voice screaming. The sensation of being dragged. And those lights, always just out of reach, pulling me deeper into the maze. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, dehydrated and delirious. They told me a search team found me wandering near the base alone. No sign of Hernandez or Kareem. No sign of the village. I didn't tell them what happened. What would be the point? Even now, I can't say for sure what was real and what wasn't, but I know this much. I will never go near those mountains again. Some places aren't meant to be understood, and some rules are better left unbroken. Afghanistan wasn't the last time I saw something I couldn't explain. As much as I wanted to believe it was just a freak event, something that could be chalked up to sleep deprivation or paranoia, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened in that village had opened a door. It's like once you see one crack in reality, you start noticing more. Maybe it's the places that were sent far from civilization, where the rules are thinner. Or maybe it's us, the things we carry, the things we've done. What I do know is that those mountains weren't the end of it. The second time was in the Philippines. Jungle deployment, joint operation with local forces. Our objective was to track down a militant group operating out of the southern islands, deep in the rainforest. It should have been a straightforward mission, but when we reached the rendezvous point, the locals were spooked. The lieutenant brushed it off his nerves, but the way they kept glancing at the treetops and muttering under their breath set me on edge. One of their leaders, a grizzled man with a face like old leather, pulled me aside while the officers talked. He didn't speak much English, but he managed to get the message across. "Bad place," he said, gesturing to the jungle ahead. "No go." When I asked why, he just shook his head and tapped his temple. Bad spirits. We went anyway. The jungle was dense, the kind of place that swallows sound. Even with all of us moving together, The only noise was the crunch of boots on dead leaves and the occasional squawk of some unseen bird. After a while, even those sounds faded, replaced by an unnatural quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Small branches started moving when there was no wind, shapes flickering at the edge of my vision. At first I thought it was just the jungle playing tricks, but then we found the clearing, the trees around it. They were massive, their trunks twisting unnaturally, like they were frozen mid-writhing. Their bark was blackened, not burned, but different, like it had grown that way. In the center of the clearing was a stone statue, half buried in vines. It looked ancient, older than anything I'd ever seen, with carvings that made my stomach churn just looking at him. The lieutenant ordered us to secure the area, but the locals refused to step into the clearing. They stayed at the edge, clutching their rifles and muttering prayers. I didn't blame them. The air inside was strange, like the world was holding its breath. And that's when we saw the first one. It was Johnson who spotted it, a face staring at us from one of the twisted trees. It blinked. So help me God, it blinked. Its eyes were sunken and milky, its mouth frozen in a grin. Johnson aimed his rifle, but before he could fire, it moved. Not like a person. It didn't climb down or jump. It just shifted like it was part of the tree. And then it wasn't. More faces appeared, dozens of them, emerging from the trunks and branches. Some were human, others distorted into shapes that made my stomach turn. They didn't move toward us, they just watched their grins growing wider. The lieutenant ordered us to fall back, but when we turned, the clearing wasn't there anymore. The trees had shifted, closing in like a wall. We didn't camp that night. We kept moving, trying to find a way out. Every path we took led us back to the clearing around midnight. The locals finally spoke up. They told us to stop looking for a way out and just wait. They chose one of them and said, if they let us leave, we leave. If not, he trailed off, shaking his head. We waited. The faces watched us from the trees, their eyes unblinking. Johnson couldn't take it anymore. He opened fire, unloading his entire magazine into one of the trunks. The face didn't flinch, and that's when the screaming started. It wasn't human. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a high-pitched wail that made my teeth hurt. The trees moved, their branches writhing like snakes, and the ground beneath us buckled. The locals dropped to their knees. Chanting in a language I didn't understand, the rest of us just stood there, frozen, our weapons useless in our hands. And then it just stopped. The faces vanished, the trees stilled, and the clearing was gone. When we finally stumbled out of the jungle, the locals refused to speak about what had happened. The lieutenant filed the mission as a success, but none of us talked about what we'd seen. The third time was off the coast of Somalia. Anti-piracy patrol, nothing special. We were stationed on a small frigate, spending most of our time staring at empty water. One night I was on deck watch with a guy named Larson. The sea was calm, the sky clear, but there was something off about the horizon. It was darker than it should have been. We were scanning the water when we saw it at first. I thought it was a whale breaching, but it was too big, much bigger than any whale I'd ever seen. The shape rose out of the water, massive and black, its surface glistening like oil. It stayed there for a moment, towering over the waves. And then it began to move towards us. Larson panicked, calling out to the bridge, but the comms were dead. The thing kept coming. By the time it reached the ship, the entire crew was on deck, weapons drawn. It didn't attack. It just loomed there. The air grew thick, and it got cold, frost forming on the rails and windows. The captain ordered us to fire, but our weapons didn't do anything. The rounds disappeared into its mass, swallowed like pebbles in a pond. The thing stayed there for hours. Some of the crew started acting strange, walking toward the edge of the deck like they were in a trance. We had to physically restrain them to keep them from jumping overboard when dawn finally broke. The thing was gone. Nobody saw it leave, and the comms came back online as if nothing had happened. The official report listed it as an unidentified marine anomaly, but none of US believed that. Whatever it was not natural. After that, I started noticing patterns. The places we went, the missions we were sent on, they weren't random. There was something about them, something the higher-ups weren't telling us. I don't know if it's the military itself or just the things we're exposed to, but I've come to realize there are rules to all of this. Rules you have to figure out on your own, because nobody's going to spell them out for you. Here's what I've learned so far. If something doesn't feel right, probably it doesn't. Trust your instincts. Don't break the rules of the place you're in. Every location has its own rules, and they're not always obvious. If you can't fight it, don't try. Some things are beyond bullets and bravery. Never go alone. And the most important rule of all, once you've seen them, they've seen you. I used to think I'd be able to leave all this behind when I got out, but once I was back home, the things I'd seen would stay in the places I'd left them. I was wrong, but that's a story for another day. It was my second deployment in Eastern Europe when we encountered something I wish I could unsee. Officially, we were training with Allied forces in Romania, running exercises in the Carpathian region, where dense forests stretched as far as the eye could see. Unofficially, we were investigating reports of missing personnel from a nearby NATO base, a small recon team of 6, tasked with finding out why soldiers were disappearing without a trace. What we found was not in any field manual. The trail led us to a tiny, decrepit village nestled in the foothills. It was the kind of place that seemed to hold secrets. The houses were ancient, made of cracked stone and rotting wood, their windows dark and lifeless. The few villagers we saw hurried inside at the sight of us, muttering to each other in hushed tones. We split into pairs to cover more ground. I was with Davis, a good kid from Texas who had a knack for making everyone laugh when the tension got too high that night, though. There wasn't much to laugh about. As we moved through the village, we noticed strange symbols carved into the doors and fences, circles with jagged lines radiating outward like crude suns. They were everywhere, as if the whole town had tried to ward off something. Have you ever seen anything like this before, Sarge? Davis asked, running his hand over one of the carvings. No, I said, scanning the tree line. And I don't want to stick around to find out what it's for. And then we heard the scream. It came from one of the houses near the edge of the village. We rushed over, weapons raised, and found the door hanging off its hinges inside. The air was thick with the smell of blood. A soldier from the NATO base was lying on the floor, his throat torn open, blood pooling beneath him. Standing over the body was something. At first I thought it was a man, tall, lean, dressed in ragged black clothing. But then it turned to face us, and I saw its eyes. They were blood red, glowing faintly in the dim light. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its mouth was smeared with blood, sharp teeth glinting as it snarled. My God, Davis muttered, stepping back. The thing moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. One moment it was standing over the body. The next it was on Davis, pinning him to the ground. He screamed as its teeth sank into his neck. I didn't think I just fired. The rounds hit it square in the back, but they might as well have been BBs for all the good they did. The thing hissed and turned its attention to me, its mouth dripping with Davis's blood. It lunged and I barely got out of the way. Davis moved, I said, but he didn't respond. He was on the ground, clutching his neck, his eyes wide with terror. The creature lunged again, but this time I was ready. I grabbed a piece of broken furniture, a chair leg with a sharp, splintered edge, and I drove it into its chest as hard as I could. It let out an unearthly shriek, thrashing wildly before collapsing in a heap. For a moment I thought it was over, and then its body dissolved into ash. Scattering across the floor like dry leaves, Davis was still alive, but barely. I took off a piece of my uniform to press against the wound on his neck. The bleeding stopped quicker than it should have, and the skin around the bite had turned a sickly gray. We need to get him back to the others, I said, lifting him onto my shoulder. He didn't resist. His body is limp and cold. When we regrouped, I didn't tell the others exactly what had happened. I just said Davis had been attacked by an animal. The look in his eyes, though cloudy and distant, told me it was something far worse. We hunkered down in an abandoned barn for the night, taking turns on watch. Davis was quiet, lying in the corner with his back to the wall. He refused to eat. His breathing is shallow and uneven. At some point during my shift, I heard him muttering to himself. I moved closer, trying to make out the words. "Thirsty," he said. "I'm so thirsty." By morning, Davis wasn't Davis anymore. His skin had turned almost white, and his eyes had taken on the same blood-red hue as the creature from the night before. He avoided the sunlight streaming through the cracks in the barn's walls, his movements jerky and unnatural. When we tried to talk to him, he just stared at us, his lips curling into a faint smile. "We have to do something, Carter," one of the other Marines said. "He's not right. You saw what attacked him, didn't you? It wasn't human, was it? And now he's turning into one of them." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew he was right. That night, Davis attacked. We were preparing to move out when he lunged at Carter, knocking him to the ground. His strength was unbelievable, tossing a fully armed Marine like a rag doll. I barely had time to react before he was on top of me, his teeth snapping inches from my face. "Davis, stop," I said, but there was no recognition in his eyes, just hunger. The others pulled him off me, pinning him to the ground. He thrashed and snarled like a wild animal, his strength almost too much for all of us. "We can't keep him like this," Carter said. I knew what had to be done, but saying it out loud felt like betrayal. "We wait until sunrise," I said. We tied Davis to a post in the barn, using everything we had: ropes, belt, even a chain we found hanging from the rafters. He thrashed and growled through the night, his voice no longer sounding human when dawn came. We dragged him outside. As the first rays of sunlight touched his skin, he screamed, smoke rising from his body like steam. "I'm so sorry," I told him. The sunlight consumed him, his body igniting in a burst of flames. Within moments, there was nothing left but ash. The others didn't say anything as we packed up and left the village. What could they say? We never reported what happened. The official story was that Davis was killed in action, his body unrecoverable. The rest of us were debriefed and sent back to base, but the looks we exchanged said everything. We knew what we'd seen since then. I've learned to pay attention to the stories people don't want to tell, the superstitions, the warnings that sound like nonsense until they're not. There's a reason every culture has stories about monsters. Sometimes the stories are the only thing standing between us and them. After Romania, I swore I'd never brush off local warnings again. But promises like that have a way of fading when duty calls. It was a year later, and I was stationed on a remote base in the Balkans, deep in the forested mountains. The mission was supposed to be straightforward, a training exercise with Allied forces just like the last one. But when the locals warned us about going too far in the woods, I listened. At least I thought I did. We were conducting a recon op one night. Just me, Sergeant Lopez, and a couple of younger Marines. The area we were scouting was supposed to be clear, but the higher-ups wanted eyes on us just in case. The terrain was rough, with steep slopes and thick underbrush that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. It didn't take long for things to go sideways about an hour into the patrol. We came across a dead deer. At first glance, it wasn't unusual. Wild animals take each other out all the time. But as we got closer, the details didn't add up. The deer's body was torn apart. Its ribs cracked open like a can of sardines. Whatever had killed it wasn't just feeding. I was angry. The claw marks were too deep, the bites too violent. This wasn't the work of wolves or bears. Lopez crouched next to the carcass, frowning. "Who do you think did this?" I didn't answer. It wasn't just the brutality. It was the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's keep moving," I said. We pressed on, but the forest was different now. The usual sounds, birds, insects. The rustle of leaves had gone silent, replaced by a heavy stillness, the kind that presses against your ears and makes every step sound too loud. And that's when we heard the howl. It started as a low growl, barely audible over the crunch of our boots. We froze, scanning the darkness with our rifles raised. The growl turned into a snarl, then a deep guttural howl. That seemed to echo everywhere. "The hell was that?" One of the younger Marines, Bishop said. "Not a wolf," Lopez replied, his grip tightening on his rifle. The howl came again, closer this time. Whatever it was circling us, its movements too fast to track. Eyes on, I barked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Watch your sectors. The underbrush rustled and something massive charged out of the darkness. It hit Bishop first, knocking into the ground before we could react. The thing that attacked him. It was huge, easily over 7 feet tall, with shaggy, matted fur and a snout full of teeth. Its eyes burned yellow, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It wasn't just a big wolf. It was something worse. Bishop screamed as the beast's claws raked across his chest, blood spraying on the forest floor. I opened fire. The beast recoiled as the rounds hit it, but it didn't fall. Lopez and I kept firing, but the bullets barely seemed to slow it down. It lunged at me, its jaws snapping inches from my face. I ducked and scrambled backward, my heart pounding as I realized we were out of our depth. The beast wasn't letting us fall back. It charged again, this time knocking Lopez to the ground. Desperate, I grabbed the first thing I could find, a jagged piece of scrap metal lying half buried in the dirt. It wasn't much, but it was something. I swung it at the beast's side, and to my surprise, it howled in pain. The smell of burning fur filled the air, and the creature stumbled back, snarling silver, Lopez said, clutching his side as he crawled away. It hates silver. I didn't have time to question how he knew that. The beast lunged again, and I drove the metal into its chest with all my strength. The effect was immediate. The beast let out an ear-splitting roar, body convulsing as smoke poured from the wound. It staggered, claws swiping wildly before collapsing. I didn't stop. I drove the silver deeper, twisting it until the beast stopped moving. When it was over, the forest was silent again. I sat there panting, staring at the massive, lifeless body in front of me. The others were in rough shape. Bishop was barely conscious, his chest a mess of claw marks, and Lopez was bleeding from a deep gash. "Is it dead?" Lopez asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed a shard of silver and plunged it into the beast's neck, just to be sure. By the time we made it back to base, Bishop was in bad condition. He didn't make it through the night. The medic said it was the blood loss, but I knew better. The look in his eyes as he lay there, fading. There was something inhuman about it. The official report listed the attack as a bearer encounter. Nobody questioned it, and no one wanted to hear otherwise. But Lopez and I knew the truth after that night. I started carrying a silver knife. It might not fit regulation, but I wasn't about to be caught unprepared again. I don't know where the beast came from, or if there are more like it, but I do know this. Some predators aren't just animals. There's something worse after everything I'd seen overseas. I thought I'd left the worst of it behind when I got back to the States. I'd done my time, survived more than my share of combat, and whatever the hell you'd call the rest. Coming home should have felt like a relief, but the shadows of what I'd seen stayed with me. You don't shake memories like that. But this was different. It wasn't just bad dreams or sleepless nights. Something followed me home. Something I couldn't fight with a rifle or a knife. No matter how many rounds I chambered or how sharp I kept my blade, it started small. The first few nights, I chopped it up to adjust. It's normal to feel on edge after deployment, to get that itch in the back of your skull like someone's watching you. But this felt specific. I'd wake up in the middle of the night. Certainly, there was someone in my room. My eyes would dart to the shadows, beneath the bed, in the corners, but nothing was ever there. At least nothing I could see. And then I started hearing laughter, faint at first. I'd get out of bed, walk through the house with my pistol drawn, but it would stop. There'd be no sound. Just that sinking feeling that I wasn't alone. The dreams started after that. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just a nightmare. I was standing in a dimly lit room, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper. There was a smell metallic and sharp, like blood left out in the sun. I saw him. He was crouched in the corner, his skin a deep, mottled red, as if it had been flayed raw. His face was long, angular. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me and grinned. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding, but the room was silent. Just a dream, I told myself. Except I could still smell it. That metallic gang in air. The second time was worse. It happened a few nights later. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling when I felt it. A weight pressing down on my chest, like someone had sat on me. My arms and legs wouldn't move, no matter how much I tried. And then I saw him again. He was standing at the foot of my bed this time, his head tilted at a strange angle. His grin was even wider now, showing rows of jagged teeth. He didn't move, but the room grew colder. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. I could only watch as he leaned closer. I could feel his breath on my face. And then he was gone. By the third time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever this was, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. This thing was real, and it wanted me to know it. I didn't know where to turn. Calling the VA to say I was being haunted didn't seem like an option. My family wouldn't understand. I didn't want to scare him. In the end, I went old school. I called a priest. Now Father O'Connell was the real deal. Old but still sharp, with a voice that carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. He didn't flinch when I told him about the thing in my house. Didn't laugh or write it off as PTSD. He just nodded and said I'll come by tomorrow when Father O'Connell arrived. He walked through each room, muttering prayers under his breath and sprinkling holy water on the walls. It wasn't until we got to the bedroom that things changed. As soon as he stepped inside, his face went pale. "It's here," he said, clutching the crucifix around his neck. I'd expected him to say something reassuring, to tell me, I don't know, that it was all going to be fine. Instead, he looked at me and said, "You need to pray." We started the exorcism just before sunset. Father O'Connell lit candles and set up a small altar in the living room. He handed me a rosary and told me to repeat his words no matter what happened. At first it, felt awkward, like we were playing at something bigger than we had a right to. But as he started reciting the prayers, the room grew colder. The candles flickered, the flames shrinking, as if the air itself had been sucked out. And then it was there. The red-faced man stepped out of the shadows, his grin wider than ever. He didn't lunge or snarl. He just stood there watching, as if daring us to continue. Father O'Connell's voice didn't waver. He held up the crucifix and commanded the thing to leave. The demon didn't like that. The room erupted into chaos. The candles blew out, plunging the room into darkness. Furniture toppled, and the air filled with the sound of something scraping against the walls. And then it was on me. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. Its hands wrapping around my throat, its breath hot and foul against my face. I clawed at the air, gasping, but it was like fighting smoke. "Pray, son," Father O'Connell said, his voice cutting through the darkness. I forced the words out, choking on each syllable, and with every prayer, the grip on my throat loosened. The air around me is growing hotter. Father O'Connell pressed the crucifix against the floor, shouting Latin phrases I didn't understand. The demon let out a guttural scream, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere. And then it was gone. When the lights came back on, the room was a mess. The walls were scorched, the furniture overturned. But things felt better. Father O'Connell looked exhausted. "It stunned," he said. I wanted to believe him, to think it was over, but a part of me knew better. I haven't seen the red-faced man since that night, but I think I still feel him sometimes in the quiet moments when the house is too still. When I woke up in the middle of the night, convinced I'm not alone, the priest told me something before he left. Something I haven't been able to forget. "Evil doesn't just appear, son," he'd said. "It's drawn to something. Pain, guilt, anger. Whatever you've seen, whatever you've done, it leaves a mark. And sometimes that's enough to invite it in." I don't know what I brought back with me from those deployments. Maybe it's just the memories, the weight of the things I've seen. Or maybe it's something worse. What I do know is this. Coming home doesn't mean you're safe. Not from them. Some doors once opened. Never really close. After the exorcism, I tried to rebuild a life that felt normal. I started spending time at the VA, helping other veterans who were struggling to adjust after deployment. It felt good to give back, to share stories, and let them know they weren't alone. But I never talked about the things I'd seen, the things I still saw. That was a weight I carried privately. Father O'Connell became something of a reluctant confidant. Every few months we'd grab coffee, and he'd ask me how things were. I could tell he was still shaken by what happened that night, but he never refused when I called him. The work isn't over, he told me once, and I knew he wasn't just talking about me even now. I keep an eye out for the signs, whispers where there shouldn't be any faces in the corners of my vision, unnatural stillness in the air. Most of the time it's nothing, but every so often I feel it. The faint hum of something that doesn't belong. I've come to accept that the world isn't what we think it is. There are cracks in the foundation, places where the rules don't hold. And while I may never understand the things I've seen, I know enough to keep watch. Because once you've faced what's out there, you realize it's always watching you too. My wife and I had been living in our ancient Victorian house for nearly 5 years before we found it. Something stank in the subfloor in the upstairs den, and I spent one quiet Saturday in September prying up plywood in hopes of discovering a dead rodent. The room was on our renovation list anyway. The maple flooring was beyond restoration, having taken some water damage when the house was abandoned in the 80s. The floorboards were stained black, like long rotted teeth, and the wood was spongy the farther I sank the pry bar in. I recoiled as the smell worsened. "Caroline," I said out the door. "Can you grab me an N95, please?" I picked up the DeWalt and deftly unscrewed the first section of the subfloor. The subfloor had been replaced not too long ago, I noticed. The house was built in the late 1800s, but the plywood boards still had a fresh blonde color to them. I heard Caroline clapping up the stairs as I wrestled the wood from the floor. The patchwork of plywood was all I could see while I held the giant sheet in front of me. I set it down gently just as Caroline came in the doorway. She extended a hand with a mask pinched in her fingers. "Thank you, love." I took it from her, but noticed she was frowning past me on the floor. I turned around. There was a loud knock from under another part of the subfloor, but for all I knew, it was the wood settling after I'd had it with a pry bar. Besides, I was instantly distracted. I followed Caroline's gaze, and there it was. Set in the subfloor under the plywood I'd moved was an old black safe with silver stenciling. "Oh shit," I shuffled on my knees over to it. "Oh my God, I've always wanted this to happen," I said, swiping the dust from it. Caroline crouched next to me and smiled. "Really? You've always wanted to haul a heavy safe down our steep staircase. You're so sweet." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, look how old this thing is. I'm not saying it's filled with gold, but it could hold history." "It's empty," she said plainly. "How do you know?" "Because they always are. People don't forget about safes when they move. They just don't want to move them." Don't listen to her. I spoke to the safe. "You are filled with treasures. Mundane documents, if anything. $20. There's something interesting inside." $20 says there's nothing at all," she replied. Caroline extended her hand and we shook on it. "Easiest $20 I've ever made," I said, patted the side of the safe. While the thing wasn't much bigger than a microwave, it weighed at least 100 unwieldy pounds. Caroline's first instinct of considering the difficulty of moving this thing was spot on. Getting it down the stairs alone would be downright dangerous. I thought I'd try to crack it open where it sat. That way, if there was something of value inside, I could secure its contents before pushing the safe itself out the window into the weed bed below. I really didn't want to carry that thing down the stairs. Finding the safe was reason enough to stop my weekend labor, and I decided to call it a day. Unfortunately, my safe tracking plan fell apart after an hour of YouTube. The best course of action for an amateur like me was to cut the back out with a saw, but the empty den was a tinderbox. One hot bit of metal sinking into the subfloor could burn a whole house down. When Caroline was busy watching TV that night, I opened the den window, hoped there was no priceless china inside, and heaved the thing out. It thumped into dirt. I leaned out the window to look after it. A part of me was hoping it would be hanging open and that the fall would break the whole thing, but it sat still like a meteorite in the earth. I walked downstairs. Caroline looked over her shoulder from the couch. "Want a hand with that thing?" "Nope, no need. I already brought it down." She paused her show. "Really?" "Yeah. Didn't you hear me huffing and puffing 20 minutes ago?" I rubbed my hands together. "You threw it out the window, didn't you?" I shrugged with a smile. It didn't hit the house on the way down. Of course not, honey. I plotted its position trajectory. She stood up and followed me out the back door. We stood over the safe like proud parents. Perhaps the pride was mine more than hers. When are you going to try to open it? Caroline asked. I'll pick up a metal blade for the circular saw tomorrow. We're having my parents over for dinner tomorrow, she replied. It's not going to take all day. A few hours tops. Tops, she repeated skeptically, and smiled at me, knowing how I got obsessed with projects. Hey, you can run the saw. I know I can run the saw, Michael. It's my saw, all right? She smiled and started heading back inside. She paused in the doorway and leaned out while I still stared at the safe. Beers and sex, she said. I squinted at her silhouette in the dark door frame, the way a lover squints at the other, wondering how they ever got so lucky. You know, I'm still a little full. Sex and beers, I said. My man's a genius, she said, as I stepped inside and she took my hand and I locked the door behind us. Later that night, I snatched a sweating beer off the nightstand. I walked into the warm hall and looked over my shoulder. Caroline hadn't stirred as much as stirred. She was sprawled on top of the sheets, where it was still hopelessly too hot to sleep. What you call a warm fall? I wondered. Indian summer, I whispered to myself and brought the beer to my lips. Every fall is hot now. It needs a new name. Normal. I walked into the little upstairs den. 5 years, and the electrical in here still didn't work. It was embarrassing, sure, but damn, it's mad how fast 5 years can pass. I squinted, trying to remember what the original quote had been to fix the lights. The scratching sound took my attention away. I never did find that rodent, but wasn't it supposed to be dead? With a subfloor and the windows opened, the smell had seemed to go away. Or perhaps I just got used to it. The scratching continued harder and heavier. The subfloor was strangely walled off in sections, so I couldn't poke a flashlight into where I'd found the safe and see in every direction. I wasn't about to get drilling with Caroline trying to sleep, so I stood and crossed my arms. Something caught my eye on the floor from where the safe had been sitting. I went back to the bedroom and came back with my phone's flashlight shining. There were tiny words carved in the dusty floor, short sentences neatly tiered above one another. Some of the letters overlapped, like it had been written in the dark. 6'1", burns on my right arm, brown eyes, no hair, my age. He said his name was Sam. Sarah Child, 1989. I sat down where the floor opened, my feet further below me near the carving. Sarah Child. I said the name aloud. Of all the strange jokes you could play on the homeowners and remodelers of the future, this was up there. I swallowed my spit nervously as I opened my phone and typed the name into Google. 30 years later, the disappearance case of Sarah Child is just as cold as it was the day she went missing. I read on. Sarah Child went missing in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania at 16 years old. She simply never showed up after walking back from a recital rehearsal late one winter night. That was it. No leads, no sightings, no nothing. Just a town gone mad with imagination. We were in Hellertown, just south of Bethlehem. I don't remember ever hearing of the case, but then again, I was born in '86, and there were plenty of disappearances in the populated Lehigh Valley. I clicked my phone off and shook my head. This was either a poor taste prank by some kids enthralled with the disappearance at the time, or I shivered. At some point, the young girl was entombed in our subfloor. And why, I wondered. Why did that name sound so familiar? I sat in silence for a long time. I heard the air conditioner start to whirl from our bedroom window. Over the next several minutes, I flinched when the house creaked as it cooled. I thought logically, and soon felt relief. Whoever had set that safe down there had no doubt seen the message. The police had possibly already been informed. It was probably a prank. Definitely a prank. At least that's what I told myself to sleep that night. The next morning, when I got back from the hardware store, Caroline was still asleep. I was aware then of the thought that whoever placed the safe there had also taken Sarah Child. Perhaps opening it was tampering with evidence, but I felt I'd look like a fool calling the police on what I convinced myself into thinking was some kind of game. If there was something fishy in the safe, then I'd call him, I decided. Otherwise, there's no need to waste anybody's time. I rolled the safe to the middle of the backyard, fitted the new blade in the circular saw, and I got to work. Not long after I started, Caroline came running outside. "What are you doing?" I stood confused and took out my earplugs. I gestured like an idiot at the safe, opening it. "Michael, it's 7 in the morning. We have neighbors." I looked around as if they might be watching me angrily. Waiting another hour or more to get to work would drive me nuts, but I relented and went inside to eat. "I knew you'd be obsessed, but what's up? You're no early riser." I debated not telling her about the writings. I don't know why. Perhaps it would become real if I told her. Perhaps I was afraid she'd want to call the police before I got to open the safe myself. "In the subfloor," I said slowly. "There's some kind of prank written there." "What?" "It's where the safe was. Just go look." I pointed towards the stairs and she frowned at me as she turned and went up them. I was tapping my coffee mug anxiously when my heart stopped. "Oh my God," I heard Caroline say in horror. "Oh my God." I started towards the stairs. I ran up to them. She was bent over the writing with her hand over her mouth. "What is it, Sarah?" She started shaking her head. She was crying now. This can't be Sarah Child. Do you know who that is?" "Googled it. My mom's cousin." She cried. "That's the one that went missing when I was just a girl. It's some prank, though, don't you think?" She said nothing for a moment. This description. What about it? In high school, she trailed off, but it's all I needed to know. While my memory of her mentioning a Sarah Child was hazy, I knew what she was thinking when Caroline was younger. She had a stalker. He'd gone as far as pretending to be her father and tried to pull her out of elementary school. His behavior wasn't consistent. She said he'd vanish for a year at a time before appearing outside her bedroom window. Sometime around her sophomore year of high school, he vanished altogether. "Does it sound like him?" I asked, my heart pounding. "What did he say his name was?" "He never did," Caroline said, looking around the room and shaking her head. "Maybe I'm just remembering wrong. Do we call someone? I mean, what if the people that used it to live here has something to do with Sarah going missing? This place was abandoned till the 90s. The subfloor was probably exposed then. And look, it's not that crazy that some drunk teens in a creepy house wrote a message knowing it'd be found one day. I want to call someone." "You want to call the police?" "I don't know. I just hate to think that She suddenly stood and backed towards me. That poor girl was trapped there. "All right, look. First thing Monday, we'll call someone." She nodded and suddenly frowned. "The safe?" "Yeah," I said anxiously. "What if there's something in there?" "Well," I smiled, trying to cheer her up. "Then you'd owe me $20. We took turns sawing. Caroline was much more enthusiastic than me now. I'd stopped the saw as flakes of molten metal stung my arms and face, but she'd seen on unfazed. After a while, we got the metal back peeled away, but there was still a layer of concrete we'd have to break through. I had the small handheld sledge on standby, and Caroline took it from me without a word and started swinging. It crumbled away, and she tossed the chunks of cement into the yard. "Anything?" I said as she peered inside. She stuck her hand in and pulled out a fistful of what looked like paper. "What is it?" I said, walking over cautiously. "Pictures," she said, and then I saw her eyes widen in fear. "Michael," she fanned some of the photos towards me, and I looked. "Michael, they're pictures of me." I grabbed some from her as she took more from the safe. They were photographs of Caroline as a baby, a toddler. We sorted through all of them. The newest photos seemed to be from around the time she turned 10. There were none when she was older. They were family photos taken by her parents. It seemed okay, I said. "And you never saw this safe before?" Caroline ignored me as she dug her phone out of her pocket. "Caroline." She held up a finger to quiet me as she put her phone to her ear. "Hey, Mo." She started to pace anxiously around the yard. Actually, I'm not sure we should do dinner. James has a cold. No, I feel fine, Mom. She was quiet for a moment while her mom spoke. I'm actually calling because I've been looking for some photographs, physical photos of me when I was younger. Caroline put the call on speakerphone. Oh, Caroline's mom sighed. How come? Well, Michael was showing me some pictures of him when he was a kid, and it just got me thinking. Well, this is a bit embarrassing, Carrie, but your father and we misplaced your picture books. We thought they were in the garage, but when we went to find them and have them digitized, well, they weren't there. Caroline and I stared at each other. I clicked my thumbnail nervously in my teeth. When was this? Several years ago now. Mom, when? I can't say exactly. You try living this long. I'm sorry we lost him. Okay, Mom, it's okay. Caroline sighed. Tell her we found them. I mouthed, but Caroline glared and disabled speaker as she put the phone back to her ear. It's really okay, she said. I only look at them once in a decade anyway. Yeah, I love you too. Sure, we'll try for next Sunday. Love you. But Caroline brought the phone down. Why didn't you tell her we found them? Why didn't you ask about the safe? Because she'd freak the hell out. And she doesn't know of the safe because it's been sitting on the floorboards for years. She snatched up all the photos and started walking inside. Caroline. I called after her. She went upstairs and came back down a minute later, dressed in jeans and a thick hoodie, despite the fact that it was already nearly 80 degrees. I'm going for a drive. That was all she said, and I felt like I couldn't ask where. She went out the door and started her car. By the time she got home, it was dusk. I'd spent the day sitting at the kitchen table, drinking beers to calm myself. When Caroline came in, she looked at my empties and snatched a bottle of bourbon from the butcher block. I don't know how you haven't moved to something harder. Are you okay? I stood and we hugged. Her clothes were torn and her cheeks had thin scratches. What aren't you telling me? She started filling a coffee mug with whiskey. When it was half full, she took a sip and pulled a photo out of the pocket of her hoodie. I took it from her, and she grimaced and brought the mug to her lips again. What's this? I said quietly, but I knew what it was. It was a picture of Caroline, taken maybe a year or two ago based on her shorter hair. She was laughing in the orange glow of a window, the kitchen window. The picture was taken at night from the backyard. On the back of the photo, there was a simple smiley face with a long, wide smile and sideways rectangles for eyes. That's his signature. What? The man who used to follow me when I was a girl. The smiley face. He signed this last note to me like that. Was this in the safe? She nodded. I looked at the kitchen window. The same one Caroline had been photographed from, and raced over to draw the blinds. That's not going to do much good. What? I paused. What do you mean? This has to be him, right? He's back. Yeah, there's a problem with that, she replied. The man that followed me when I was just still a girl. There was a thump upstairs, and we both paused and looked towards the stairs. I killed him 13 years ago. I could hear the tobacco burn as she drew on her cigarette, and I just checked where I'd buried him. And wouldn't you know it, her eyes searched the ceiling. He's not there anymore. I didn't have time to process what Caroline just told me. She was no murderer. Whatever she'd done, I knew it wasn't self-defense. Upstairs, there was another knock. We both waited for another, but it was silent then. I pushed my drink away from me and grabbed the longest kitchen knife hanging on the magnet strip above the counter. Are you sure he was dead? 100%. Just looking at his body, there was no chance. What do they call that? Caroline took another knife from the magnet strip, and we started towards the stairs. Injuries incompatible with life? Yes, she said. That. We walked cautiously up the stairs, at times stopping when the wood squeaked. I could see Caroline's pulse in her neck. My own heart hammered so hard that every stair left me more lightheaded. We searched all the rooms together in silence, but there was nothing. No one. We stopped and convened in the den, both staring at the subfloor. I stood guard with a knife and phone flashlight while Caroline picked up the drill and started unscrewing the rest of the boards. All the sheets that made up the subfloor were 6 foot by 3 foot pieces of plywood. They looked like lids, I realized. Lids to little coffins. She lifted a piece out and leaned it against the wall, and we both exhaled in relief, as there was nothing out of the ordinary in the subfloor. No dark stains, no creepy writings, no second safe, just dust and rodent droppings. She unscrewed section after section, setting them against the wall, and it was the same thing over and over. They revealed the standard innards of a house. In one of the sections, there was a heavier concentration of tiny turds than the bloated body of a mouse. Next to it, there was a hole the size of a fist. I figured the mouse must have friends. A bit of a weight lifted from our shoulders. "Is that all we heard?" I said. Mice. Caroline didn't respond. We were both standing about a foot under the original floor now that all the plywood had been removed. Caroline set her hands on her hips and took deep breaths. She walked to where the sheets were leaned against the wall and flicked through them like giant dominoes. "We weren't hearing things," I said. "Michael, that was too big to be a rodent." "Michael," Caroline said louder. I turned to her, and her eyes were so wide in horror, I couldn't bring myself to look where she was. "Shine the light," she said. As I did, she pivoted a piece of plywood on its edge to turn it out towards us. The underside of the subfloor sheet was covered in long, bloody scratches. She let it fall against the wall and quickly pivoted another one. And another. They all had the same kind of scratches, and as if we weren't sure what caused such feverish and gruesome markings, an entire fingernail jutted out of one of them. How many boards? I looked at horror on the floor. How many little tombs are in the subfloor? 9. Caroline let the board with the fingernail in it fall onto the scaffolding floor and started nearly running down the steps. I was at her heels. "We need to call the police," I said. "Caroline." She made for the kitchen, and once there splashed another shot of whiskey into her mug. "That's not going to help us right now." "Like hell it won't," she said, and threw it back in one swallow. She wiped her chin and looked at me. "Don't you want to know?" "No, what? How did I kill him?" I was silent as she poured another drink. Of course. She kicked a chair out from under the table, and it spun out to me a nearly perfect invitation to sit. I sat. "He left me a letter one night my sophomore year." She pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "He said he wanted to meet me. He'd never done that before." She trailed off and looked nervously at the stairs. "And did you?" "He wanted to meet on some wooded street by Lehigh Mountain Park. He knew I had my learner's permit, and he told me to take my dad's truck. I snuck out that night and took the truck." She sighed and pushed the drink she'd poured away. "I was driving slowly, looking for him around 2 in the morning. He was where he said he'd be, standing eerily with his hood up. But when I saw him, I accelerated. I ran him over." She looked at me guiltily, but I said nothing. I was going 40, maybe. He hardly had time to react. His head went under the wheels. I dragged him deep into the woods. I mean, deep. There was this old culvert at least 100 yards in, surrounded by buckthorn. It took me a half hour to get his body through that brush. I stuffed him in the drain pipe. That was it. I didn't bury him, but he may as well have been. Could he have washed away? Caroline shook her head. There wasn't even a gully there anymore. It was drained and nothing. Still does. I checked. Maybe his body was found. Do you know how often I search results for bodies found in Lehigh Mountain Park? Did you today? Of course. There's nothing. I leaned back and we were both silent with our thoughts for a minute. If anything, I think better of you, Caroline. You're not a cold-blooded killer. I want you to know that. I understand you're never telling me. I understand why you did it. And I love you all the same. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. Thank you, Michael. But, I sighed, don't you think we need to call the police? There could be DNA on the blood on those boards. We could find out who kidnapped Sarah. We stop. We're not calling anyone. Why? Because I don't want to go to prison for the rest of my life. They're not going to find out. What possible evidence could there even be? Think about it. A truck that might have some DNA on it, that is God knows where. Nobody, There's no security camera footage from 13 years ago. You're safe, Caroline. The truck was scrapped. See, let's call him now. I can't sleep in this house anymore, please, said Caroline. Can we please just call him in the morning? All right, I sighed. But don't judge me when I check under the bed tonight. We both called in from work, and the police were over by 9 a.m. It wasn't the circus we thought it would be. I'd pictured satellite news trucks and a squadron of cops, but in all, only 2 cars came, one a patrol cruiser and the other an unmarked Ford Taurus of the detective. We explained what we found down to the fingernail, but the response was subdued. Well, we'll try and get some DNA, see if we get any missing persons matches, said the detective. We'll swap around for fingerprints if that's all right, and look into the previous owners as well. Is there anything else you can tell us? Caroline and I looked at each other. I'd argued that we needed to tell them about the safe, but she refused. We shook our heads. All right, well, if you think or find anything else, he smiled. Be sure to give us a call. After the police left, I went out to the backyard. If there were any useful fingerprints, I knew they'd likely be on the safe. I sighed and stared at the tree line. While we had neighbors on either side, behind our house was a couple dozen undeveloped acres of woods. The land ran downhill, and after rains the water would run off where the woods flattened, ready to flood the foundations of any ambitious developer. The woods weren't good for much. They were too thick, wet, and steep for hiking, and were mostly frequented by local teenagers to have bonfires and drink beer. Someone could easily live there, I thought. The tree line was right where it seemed the photo of Caroline had been taken. I walked to the garage when I was startled by a voice. Hey, neighbor. I put my hand on my heart and smiled. Greg, I said, you scared me. Oh, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry for being a nosy neighbor, but I'm just wondering if everything's all right. I saw the police cars. Greg had earned his right to be nosy. A year ago, when I was backing out of my driveway, my brakes stopped working. After bleeding the fluid to no avail, I called a tow truck to take my car to the shop. Greg had come outside, curious when he saw the tow truck pull in. He called the mechanic a crook and shooed him away. After taking a look himself, he said my brake master cylinder wasn't delivering pressure. He and I got in his truck, bought a new cylinder, and had the brakes working perfectly in under an hour. Ever since then, I'll bring him a beer and shoot the shit when I see him working on the classic Corvette he keeps in his garage. Oh, everything's fine. Caroline and I found some things that might relate to an old missing persons case. To be honest, it's probably just a prank some kids left. We called just to be safe. He stroked his beard, considering. What kind of things? You don't mind me asking? Well, writings of, you see. He interrupted me. That fellow used to live here before you. He was an odd one. It was a woman that lived here when we bought it. I said, confused. No, I see why you think so. I believe she would have been on the deed, but it was a son of hers or something that lived in this place. He turned towards the street. Can I show you something? Sure. Actually, it might take me a minute to find it. Come over to my place with Caroline and say. He looked at his watch. 15 minutes. How's that working? Works fine. Greg. Greg lived directly across the street from us, and when Caroline and I knocked, we heard him yell to come in from deeper in the house. We opened the door and took off our shoes in the dining room. He leaned back in a chair so he was in view down the hallway and waved. His place was orderly, it was clean, and there were pictures lining the wall of him with a woman and what we presumed to be his children. But we'd never seen him with a wife, nor had he mentioned one. All the pictures of the woman were older, and I realized poor Greg was likely a widower. Hey guys, sit down. I've just about got it here. He was sitting behind a Hewlett-Packard laptop the size of a small poodle. I wanted to show this to you before, but I just didn't know how. He spun the computer around. A video player was open on his computer. It was footage from a doorbell camera that looked out directly towards our house. Now, I know this'll sound crazy, but this tape is from summer 2016, just when you two moved in. I've kept it up all this time. We leaned forward. Why do you keep footage this old? Asked Caroline. Greg said nothing and pointed at the computer as if a question was about to be answered in one of the upper bedroom windows of our house. I noticed a man was standing inside at the sill. You see the man in the window there? We nodded. Hit that double arrow thingy. Fast forward a bit. I hit fast forward, and while the daylight outside faded fast, the figure of the man at the window stayed still. Keep hitting it. I pressed it so it was at 16x speed. Hours passed. The man stayed at the window. How long does this go on for? Greg said nothing. He only nodded down, suggesting the footage would again answer our questions for us. I set the fast forward to as fast as it would go. An entire day passed on film, and then the next day at dawn, a moving truck pulled in. Caroline and I stepped out, and the man in the window stepped back, disappearing into the house. What the hell? I know I should have shown you earlier. Greg sighed. I convinced myself he was a friend of yours or something. It seemed ridiculous. How do you bring that up? Howdy, neighbor. Nice to meet you. Here's a pie. And by the way, check out what my doorbell camera picked up in your upstairs window. Caroline and I looked at each other. How did you notice this? I asked. The man in the window. How did you know he was there? I noticed him before I saw him on the camera. He was there plain as day. Here. Drake took the laptop back and clicked a few times and turned it back around. You were fast forward and too quick, but I even tried to wave to him. Greg appeared on the footage. He stepped out onto the street and waved to the man in the window, but the man didn't move. That didn't do much good, you see. Well, why was he just standing there? Caroline asked. Greg suddenly looked uncomfortable, like there was something he didn't want to say. Well, he clicked his tongue against his teeth. It looks like he was waiting for you. The footage was from too far away to tell if the figure in the window looked anything like Caroline's stalker, and Greg's description of the man he'd seen living there before wasn't very helpful either. The next few days, I'd stare out the window towards the woods, wondering if someone else was looking back. It was late one night when we got the call. The detective had called Caroline's cell. She put it on speaker, and we sat together at the kitchen table. Hey, I'm sorry to call you so late. It's okay. We're plenty awake. So we're still waiting for DNA results. And again, depending on the circumstances, we might not be able to share anything with you. But the reason I'm calling, we did get results back for the fingerprints. The thing is, how many people live in your home? Have you had any guests stay for a long period of time recently? No, said Caroline. Okay, well, we've identified 3 prominent sets of prints in your home. We've identified those of you and your husband. But the third scent. Caroline and I looked at each other. We can't find a match in the records, so I'm calling to ask, do you have any idea who those fingerprints might belong to? We had no idea who those fingerprints might have belonged to. Caroline wanted to get a hotel for the night, and I had to agree. There was no way I'd be able to sleep in that house another night without developing an alcohol dependency. Let's get a nice room in town, she said. We were both walking upstairs. I had a knife clenched in my fist. We checked all the rooms and even looked behind the shower curtain before we took out our suitcases and got to packing. It didn't take me long to pack, but Caroline was being thorough, making sure we wouldn't have to come back anytime soon for something she forgot. When I was done, I went into the den. I took one last look around with the flashlight. I was just about to leave when it caught my eye. Where one of the sideways boards met the den wall that separated the room from our bedroom, there was the crescent scar of a sawzall in the wood. Just a slight half circle, shoulder width. A door, I realized. A door in the side of the subfloor that someone could crawl through. I kicked the shape hard and quick with my heel. It didn't budge. It seemed like the little trap door probably only opened out, not in. Caroline, I yelled over my shoulder, and she dropped something on the bath tile and ran to me. What? What is it? She stood in the doorway. Get the DeWalt. I was stupid. I should have been more cautious. I should have just burned the house down. But at that moment, I felt more angry than afraid. I wasn't going to let some freak or even some ghost terrorize us in our home. Caroline could hardly see the scar in the wood. She didn't think there was a door. I found an eye hook in the garage and we drilled it into the trap to give it a makeshift handle so we could pull it outwards. I bore out the wood door with a 6-inch bit and fitted in the eyeball. I set my hand on the cold stainless steel and angled it so it took hold. I looked at Caroline and pulled. The piece fell from its place, and we both jumped back. Now the entrance was a black crescent. Now I wasn't so angry anymore. Cold fear crept back down my spine. Were those eyes looking out from that darkness? "We need to leave and call the police," said Caroline. Okay, finish up packing. I can call the detective back." She raised her brow at me and looked at the hole as she started walking back to the bathroom. I turned back to the passageway. I'd just take a quick look in, I told myself. There was no way I'd ever crawl through that hellish hole, but I'd just shine the light in quick. I had to know what was under our bedroom floor all this time. I couldn't just turn around and walk out. My heart fluttered in my chest. I turned my phone flashlight back on and squatted so I was level with the entrance. I brought the light up so I could see it. I've never felt such a jolt of fear. Illuminated in the white light just past the entrance was a bearded face, pale and smiling back at me. I fell backwards screaming. I heard Caroline call out my name, but someone was on top of me. They brought down something heavy on my head, and the world went black. I woke up nauseous to the muffled sound of voices. I was pitch black with my hands bound at my belly. You have no idea. I heard a deep baritone begin above me. How long I've been waiting for this. How many times I wanted to reveal myself and tell you. Go to hell. I heard Caroline scream. Sometimes when I watched you make love, I wanted to burst out from the floor just to say hello. Oh, what your expressions would be. If you killed him, I swear to God. Hey, I'm here, I said. There was a ceiling a few inches from my forehead, and I banged my head against it. Michael, Caroline said back. Here, I'm here. I was wedged in between something rough and dusty, and I realized I was in the subfloor beneath our bedroom. See, you were just out for a little bit. I wouldn't just kill him. I've always wanted him to hear this too. Caroline, run. I can't. I heard her cry. I can't. My hands, they're tied. I understand our little reunion, but if you two are quieter, I'm going to have to kill you, Caroline, while he listens. Do you want to feel your wife's blood trickle onto your face through the floor? I said nothing. Good. I killed you, I heard Caroline say. I dragged your body. Oh, I knew you'd run that poor bastard over. What? Who was it then? Who did I kill? Oh, the kind of person no one notices is even gone. The kind of person who will stand on a wooded street all night for $100. I'm sorry, but I had to do it. I needed you to think you were free of me. I was sloppy, my sweetheart. I wanted to be a part of your life, to watch the whole thing unfold. But you were always watching for me. I even buried him for you so you could never get in trouble. Please don't hurt us. I heard Caroline whimper. Did you know I saw you as a little girl? Did you know that? It sounds mad, but I have loved you since then, since I saw all 3 feet of you standing behind your mother at a vigil to find her lost cousin. You were so beautiful. But I knew I'd have to wait. I knew I'd have to apply patience that I'd never had before. Please. He ignored her and kept talking. This was my mother's home. We fixed it up together. When she died, I was able to have more fun here. But then I heard you and your husband were looking for a home. I priced it so low I knew you'd put it on offer. And for the last 5 years, I heard his voice grow louder with a kind of pleasure. I slept just a few feet under you every single night. I slept so soundly with my girls, knowing one day I'd add you to their eternal mix. My girls, I fought. I leaned my head out to feel what I was sandwiched between. Soft tickle of hair on both sides. Bodies on both sides. The 9 bodies he first locked in the floor were now beneath the bedroom. I took out all their innards. I smoked the moisture from their corpses like meat. Isn't that incredible? 9 bodies, just feet from where you sleep, and you don't smell a thing. I heard Caroline scream, and I beat my head against the floor. I'll kill you. Oh, calm down, Michael. If only you understood how well I've come to know you two. I heard him stand, and the floor above me began to jostle. He lifted up an entire section of the bedroom floor, revealing light that burned my concussed brain. The man bent over to look down at me. He was older, with a long black beard that had begun to gray. This is where I come and go. I always thought this door is where you discover me. Funny how that is. Never would I have thought you'd tear up that old den. You didn't even bother to get the lights working there. I scooched on top of the body to my left so I could see Caroline. Her hands were bound in front of her as well. I caught her eye and spoke what I figured would be some of my last words. I love you so much, Caroline. I love you. Caroline seemed too shocked to respond, but when the man looked at me, I noticed she took the time to wriggle her hands a little. Her bindings were loose. It was difficult to know when I could come out. Ever since you both started working from here, this little project took on a new level of patience. But my brother was nice enough to help me. He let me know when you both left. You've met him, haven't you, Greg? Told him I'd share some of your killing with him in return. Oh, like I'd ever share with you, my lifelong project. The man looked at May and Caroline and nodded, pleased with himself. What do you think? He brought his arms up and let them slap at his sides. A masterpiece, isn't it? I think you're screwed, said Caroline. She threw off her bindings and sprinted from the bedroom. The man recoiled in shock and stumbled a moment before pursuing her. I pulled my legs up and struggled to contort my body enough so I could stand through the hole in the floor. I heard hard thumps. Caroline screamed down the hall. No, 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 Caroline. I managed to stand, and I jumped out of the subfloor. When I found my footing, I started running, hoping to use my momentum to charge into our attacker. There was another thump and then the whine of a drill. When I got to the doorway to the den, I was just in time to see. Caroline and the man were wedged in one of the sections of the subfloor, and she had the heel of her hand pressed hard into the back of the door. The 6-inch bit I'd put on the drill to bore out the wood board was all the way depressed into the man's eye socket. She rotated the drill, screaming while stirring his brains like soup. Despite the fear and the gore, I swear in that moment I've never loved that woman more. Caroline, Caroline, he's gone. He's dead. She leaned back on her knees and let the drill fall. The long bit slowly slid from his eye socket. Fuck her. She punched him across the face with her right hand, then with her left again and again. I couldn't hold her hands to stop her. Caroline, snap out of it. Untie me. The neighbor, his brother, could be coming. Her head bolted upright. She stood and stepped into the hall. Come here, she said, and quickly undid the knot to my bindings. I flung my arms around her and squeezed. I love you. The neighbor, she said. We'll call the police. We'll get in the car, we'll get somewhere safe, and we'll call the police. I saw my phone on the floor from when he'd first attacked me. I stepped down into the den and picked it up. What are you doing? I'm calling the police. She hit the phone from my hand, and it cracked back down to the subfloor. Caroline leaned down and scooped up the drill. She walked to our bedroom, and I followed her in. What the hell? What are you doing? She pinched the blinds and looked out the window. Greg, she said, his lights are off. His truck is there. He's home and he's unaware. That's great. Let's call the police. 5 years, Michael. They did this to us for 5 years. There was a fury in her eyes I'd never seen before. I know. Believe me, I know. I'm going to pay Greg a visit. What do you mean? She nodded down at the drill. What? It doesn't matter what he did. If you break in and kill him when you could have called the police, that's still murder. She shrugged and started walking past me. We'll hide the body. She turned back and clicked the drill trigger a couple times. Blood spun off the bit. I know the perfect place. My name is Patrick Matheson. I'm 38 years old, single, and work as the head librarian in a town so small you'd miss it if you blinked driving past Pine Hollow. Population 1432, give or take. I don't get out much. My days are steady, predictable. I open the library at 9 a.m., shelving books. Help the occasional visitor find something obscure and close up by 6 p.m. Most nights I make dinner, read a book, and fall asleep before 10 p.m. I live alone in a little house 3 blocks from the library. It's nothing fancy. 2-bedroom bungalow with a leaky faucet in the kitchen and creaky floorboards that I keep meaning to fix. My house smells like coffee and old wood. Probably because I drink too much of the former and forget to dust the latter. The only company I have is Rupert, my cat. He's a surly fat tabby with a knack for knocking over whatever I've left on the edge of the table. He is a handful, but I like the company. Now, people in Pine Hollow are friendly enough, but I wouldn't say I have any close friends. Maybe it's my fault. Not exactly a social butterfly. I prefer the quiet. The library feels like a sanctuary to me. There's something comforting about the smell of books and the muffled silence of the place. It's a space where nothing bad happens, where time slows down and the world doesn't feel so loud, though it's a normal place to work. There's something very strange about this library. I can't quite put my finger on it, but every now and then I'll see something move quickly in the back aisles. Or a book will fall from the top shelf and slam with a thud, nearly giving me a heart attack. Explainable things. Well, maybe, but sometimes I do wonder. Still, some days I can't help but think like I'm stuck in a loop. Wake up, go to work, go home, repeat. If there's one thing I've learned about small town life, it's that routine is king. People don't like surprises here, and life just is. Maybe that's why I like old books so much. They hold pieces of lives that were far more interesting than mine. Kings, explorers, murderers, lovers, all wrapped up in dusty pages. When I find something unique in the library's back room or at estate sales, it's like discovering a secret. I'll spend hours thumbing through ancient texts, trying to imagine what it must have been like to live in a different time. In a different place now, the back room of the library is where we keep the books that don't make it to the shelves. Outdated encyclopedias, forgotten manuscripts, or donations nobody wants. It's my favorite place in the building. Rows of sagging shelves are crammed with volumes that haven't seen the light of day in decades. The air is thick with the smell of mildew and paper, sometimes when a library is empty. I'll sneak back there to dig around, hoping to find a hidden gem. Sometimes I'll find strange books, dark books that give me a chill. I remember the day Mr. Grayson, my boss, stopped by my desk. He was a wiry man in his 60s, with thick glasses and a voice like a rusty hinge. He wasn't one for small talk, which made it all the stranger when he dropped a folded piece of paper on my desk and cleared his throat. Rules, he said, tapping the paper with a bony finger. If you're going to keep working here, you better follow these to the letter and fold the paper, my brow furrowing as I read. The first 4 rules were peculiar, though mostly harmless. Rule number 1. Always feed the goldfish before closing. Rule number 2. If the lights go out, close your eyes until they come back on. They always do. Rule number 3. Never touch the 3rd book on the 2nd shelf in the back room. Rule number 4. Don't let anyone check out a book without a barcode. But it was the 5th rule that made my stomach twist, though I couldn't say why. Rule number 5. Always tell the truth. It might just save your life. I looked up, half expecting him to laugh and say it was a joke, but he just stared at me, his expression as unreadable as ever. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with a note and a creeping sense of unease. It was on a cold December afternoon when I found it. It had been snowing all morning, and the library was practically deserted. The only visitor I'd had was old Mrs. Hargrove, who returned 3 romances with dog-eared pages and a lecture about how kids these days don't appreciate good literature. By noon, I decided to spend some time in the back room. I told myself I was organizing the shelves, but really, I was just bored. That's when I saw the book. It was wedged between 2 crumbling atlases on a shelf I'd never bothered with before. The cover caught my attention right away. It was dark brown, almost black, and looked like leather, but not the kind you'd find on a fancy journal or a new wallet. This leather. It was uneven, rough, like it had been stretched over the cover by hand. There was no title, just a small class keeping it shut. I don't know why, but touching it made my skin crawl. The leather felt warm, almost like it was alive. My first instinct was to put it back on the shelf and pretend I hadn't seen it, but curiosity got the better of me. I unclasped the book and opened it. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting. It wasn't printed like most books. Every word was written in a neat, slanted script. The ink had faded to a rusty brown, and the pages felt brittle under my fingers. At the top of the first page, in bold letters, were the words "The Naughty List." I couldn't help but struggle. My first thought was that it was some kind of joke, like a twisted Christmas-themed diary. But as I flipped through the pages, my smile faded. The book was filled with names, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, written in the same elegant handwriting. Each name was crossed out with a sharp, heavy line of ink, except one. At the bottom of the last page, under all the crossed-out names, was my name, Patrick Matheson. I stared at my name for a long time. My hands shook as I flipped back through the book, hoping I'd missed something. An explanation and note. I don't know anything, but there was nothing. Just pages and pages of crossed-out names. Okay, Patrick, it's probably a prank. Someone's messing with you, I told myself. But who? Nobody ever went into the back room except me, and I had never seen the book before. Besides, how would they know my name? My full name? Rupert let out a low yowl from the doorway, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the book. He stood there, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. His fur bristled, and he backed away as I tried to shoo him out. "Fine, you little coward," I muttered, closing the book with a snap. "I'll figure this out myself." I spent the rest of the day trying to shake off the unease. I locked the book in my desk drawer and tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept wandering back to it. By the time I closed the library for the night, I was exhausted. Still, I couldn't resist taking the book home with me. I needed answers. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, I opened the book again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The crossed-out names seemed different. At first glance, they looked like random scribbles, but under the light I could see faint impressions beneath the ink. Words. I fetched a pencil and gently rubbed it over one of the names. The hidden message revealed itself like a ghost rising from the page. Found by the fire, 1842. Chills ran down my spine, and I tried another. Taken from the shadows, 1927. I went through more names, each with its own cryptic phrase. Dragged, screaming into the snow, 1899. Last seen under the tree, 1975. Every phrase was worse than the last. They painted a picture of something I couldn't understand, something terrible. And then there was my name. I rubbed the pencil over the blank space beneath it, praying it wouldn't reveal anything. But the words appeared anyway, faint but unmistakable. Before midnight, I felt the blood drain from my face. Midnight, the night. Before I could process what that meant, I heard a sound. At first I thought it was the wind, but it grew louder, sharper, a scraping noise like claws on glass. It was coming from the living room window. A few minutes passed, and even after the sound at the window stopped, though I wasn't entirely sure it ever really had, my nerves were shot. Midnight loomed closer, and the phrase before midnight repeated in my head like a countdown. I sat at my kitchen table with a book open in front of me. The weight of its dark leather, cover pressing down on me. There had to be something I could do. I wasn't ready to believe that this was real. I mean, books don't kill people. Lists don't kill people. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? But as much as I wanted to convince myself, the crossed-out name said otherwise. I couldn't stop picturing the words I'd uncovered beneath each one. Each name was someone who'd been found, taken, or dragged by something. Something that hadn't finished its work. Something that was coming for me. I flipped back through the book, my fingers trembling. Most of the names were unfamiliar, but halfway through I noticed something strange. A single name. Among thousands of crossed-out ones were circled in faded red ink. Gerald H. Bonner. Unlike mine, this name wasn't at the bottom of the list. It was buried in the middle of the book, surrounded by old names from the 1940s and 50s. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. Gerald H. Bonner. Why hadn't his name been crossed out like the others? Grabbing my laptop, I typed the name into a search engine, half expecting nothing to come up. But to my surprise, it did. Now, there were only a few results, but the second one made my stomach twist. A mugshot Gerald H. Bonner, a 76-year-old man who'd been arrested 6 months ago for assault. The article said he'd been released on bail and was living in a neighboring town, Ravenhill, just 40 miles away. The implications hit me hard. He was alive. He was the only name besides mine that hadn't been crossed out. That meant he might know something about this list, about what it all meant. The drive to Ravenhill was tense. Snow lashed against my windshield, and the rocks were slick with ice. I kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard. Every minute brought me closer to midnight. Every shadow on the roadside made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself that this was stupid, that Gerald H. Bonner wouldn't know anything about some cursed book. But what choice did I have? My name was in that book. And if Gerald's wasn't crossed out yet, he might have a way to stop it, or at least buy me some time. I pulled up to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of Ravenhill. The building was 3 stories of cracked brick and rusted balconies with a flickering neon sign that read Ravenwood Apartments. It looked like the kind of place you'd avoid after dark, but I didn't have the luxury of waiting until morning. I checked the article again. Gerald lived in Unit 2B. The hallway smelled like mildew and something sour. Paint peeled from the walls and the carpet squished under my boots. When I reached his door, I hesitated. What was I even going to say? Hey, hi there. I found your name in a creepy book. You want to chat about it? Before I could lose my nerve, I knocked. The door creaked open almost immediately, and I was hit with a wave of stale beer and cigarette smoke. A man stood in the doorway, tall but hunched, with greasy gray hair and a face like crumpled leather. His eyes were bloodshot, his teeth yellowed. Who the hell are you? He growled. Mr. Bonner? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Patrick Matheson. I need to talk to you about something important. Important? Are you selling something? No, listen. This is going to sound crazy. I know, but your name is in this book I found. It's a list. A list of people who should mind their damn business. He snapped, starting to close the door. Wait, I blurted, sticking my foot in the gap. This book. It's called the Naughty List. Your name's in it, and it's not crossed out. That stopped him for a moment. His watery eyes flicked to mine, and I saw something there. Recognition. Fear. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a scowl. You are drunk, crazy, or both, he said. But his voice had lost its edge. He opened the door wider. All right, fine. You want to waste my time. Come on in. The apartment was even worse than I'd imagined. Empty beer cans littered every surface, and the air reeked of unwashed clothes and burnt food. Gerald slumped into a threadbare recliner and gestured for me to sit on a couch that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 1970s. I perched on the edge, clutching the book like a lifeline. So Gerald said, lighting a cigarette with hands that shook slightly, "What's this about a list?" I opened the book and flipped to his name. This list. It's full of names, all crossed out except yours and mine. His eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, studying the page. He didn't speak for a long time, but his lips twitched as if he were chewing on words he didn't want to say. Listen, kid, I don't know what you think you've got there, but you don't want to mess with that. Trust me. You recognize it then. I pressed. You know what it is? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I've seen it before. A long time ago. What is it? What happens to people on the list? His laugh was bitter, humorless. What happens? That's what happens. One way or another, they all get what's coming to them. You think it's a coincidence? I'm the only name left. I've been dodging this thing for decades. It's like a damn curse. My heart pounded. How did you survive? Why hasn't it come for you? He gave me a sharp look. You don't think I tried to figure that out? I've done everything. Burned the book, buried it, gave it to some idiot to pass the curse along. But it doesn't matter. Nothing works. You're on the list? Well, you're screwed. End of story. So there's no way to stop it. No. The best you can do is buy yourself some time. Or pass it on to someone else, someone you don't care about. He gave me a cruel smile. Well, good luck, kid. Now get the hell out. I left Gerald's apartment, feeling worse than when I'd arrived. The man was vile, bitter, and mean in a way that went beyond words. I didn't know if I believed everything he told me, but one thing was clear if he was on that list. He deserved to be. The snow was coming down harder now, blanketing the parking lot in white. I was halfway to my car when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from Gerald's apartment. I stopped, turning back to look. The sound grew louder, sharper, until it echoed through the cold air. It was coming from above. From the chimney, it was loud now, scraping, crunching, a deep rumble that didn't belong to anything human. I froze by my car, snowflakes sticking to my hair, my breath clouding the freezing air. My brain told me to leave, to get in the car and drive away, but my legs refused to move. I couldn't look away from Gerald's apartment. A deep thud reverberated through the night, making the window closest to the chimney rattle in its frame. Whatever was coming down was not small. The noise stopped suddenly, leaving behind an eerie silence that somehow felt worse. Then I saw it. The chimney exploded outward. In a burst of soot and crumbling brick, a hulking figure emerged, crouched low in Gerald's dimly lit living room. My stomach dropped. The thing wasn't human. It couldn't be. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with long, gnarled limbs covered in coarse black fur. Curved horns jutted from his skull, scraping the low ceiling as it unfolded its body with unnatural ease. I could see jagged teeth, and its glowing red eyes scanned the room like it was hunting. Slung across its back was a filthy sack, the fabric bulging and writhing as if something inside was still alive. I pressed myself flat against the hood of my car, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. From where I crouched, I had a clear view through the apartment's window, but I prayed the thing wouldn't look out. Inside, Gerald stood frozen in his recliner. His face pale as ash, his cigarette fell from his lips. The creature moved faster than I expected for something so large. It lunged across the room, grabbing Gerald by the shirt front before he could even stand. He screamed, thrashing against the creature's grasp, but it was no use. The thing's claws wrapped around him like steel, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. Gerald's screams dissolved into a choking wail as the creature leaned in close, its face inches from his. It opened its mouth, and the sound that emerged made my blood cold. It wasn't a roar or a growl, something worse. A guttural, otherworldly laughter that shook the walls. I could only watch, paralyzed. As the creature reached into its sack and pulled out a small, ornate wooden box. The box was oddly beautiful, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the light. It set the box on the floor, opened the lid, and then began its work. Gerald flailed and screamed, clawing at the thing's arms as it began to fold him. That was the only way to describe it. The creature bent Gerald's body in ways that weren't natural, compacting him like a doll, bones cracked, flesh compressed, and his screams turned into garbled, desperate shrieks. The thing didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. It shoved Gerald into the box, piece by piece, folding and cramming until a man's entire body disappeared inside. The last thing I saw was his face. He was somehow still alive, twisted in terror before the creature slammed the lid shut. It was over in seconds. The room fell silent. The creature stood there for a moment. It's hunched back to the window, holding the box in its massive hands. And then it turned slowly, and its eyes locked onto mine. I don't know how it saw me through the dark and the snow, but it did. The red glow of its eyes pierced the night, and for a horrifying moment I felt like I was the only thing it could see. And then it smiled. The grin spread across its grotesque face, revealing yellowed teeth. It wasn't a smile of kindness or warmth. It was the kind of smile you'd see on a predator that just cornered its prey. One clawed finger extended, pointing directly at me. My heart stopped. No, the creature's laughter echoed in my head as I scrambled into my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to get them into the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I slammed the car into reverse, nearly skidding into a snow bank as I peeled out of the parking lot. My headlights sliced through the falling snow, but in my rearview mirror I could still see the window of Gerald's apartment. The thing was standing there, watching me leave, its glowing eyes burning like coals. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway back to Pine Hollow. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my chest felt like it was going to explode. The radio was off, the heater on full blast, but I couldn't stop shivering. Every shadow on the road looked like it was about to come alive. Every noise is like the crunch of claws on snow. What the hell had I just seen? Was it real? It had to be. No hallucination could have been that vivid, that visceral. And if it was real, what did that mean for me? I thought about what Gerald had said before. The best you can do is by yourself sometime. He'd known exactly what was coming for him. He'd seen it before, and now so had I. The book. It all came back to the book. Gerald said he tried burning it, burying it, even passing it along to someone else. None of it had worked, but he'd survived decades without being taken. How? He must have done something to keep it at bay, some way to stay one step ahead. The only clue I had was the book itself. It was still on the passenger seat. I reached over, flipping it open with one hand as I sped down the snowy RD. My name stared back at me from the bottom of the last page, stark and uncrossed, and underneath it the words "before midnight." I flipped back to the pages with the other names, scanning the phrases I'd uncovered before. Found by the fire, 1842. Taken from the shadows, 1927. Dragged, screaming into the snow, 1899. None of it made sense. What connected these people? What had they done to deserve this? And then it hit me. It was so obvious, Gerald. He was a terrible person, a violent, cruel man who didn't think twice about hurting others. Could that be it? Was the list some kind of twisted punishment for the wicked? If so, why was my name on it? I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't evil, was I? My thoughts spiraled as the miles ticked by. The snow was falling heavier now, obscuring the road ahead. I swing in through the windshield, my mind racing. Maybe the book wasn't just a list. Maybe it was a test. A loud thump jolted me from my thoughts. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in the middle of the empty RD. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around. But there was nothing, just snow and darkness. And then from somewhere behind me, I heard it. Laughter. Deep, guttural, and very close. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The laughter was gone, swallowed by the night, but it still echoed in my head. I could feel the weight of the book on the seat next to me, as if it were alive, watching and waiting. Midnight was coming, and with it, something I couldn't outrun. I knew what I had to do. The thought came suddenly. It wasn't an idea. It was a memory, a dark, jagged fragment. I'd buried so deep that I almost didn't recognize it. Years ago, when I was in my early 20s, things weren't great. I was broke, struggling to make ends meet, barely getting by with odd jobs. It was a low point in my life, one I'd worked hard to forget. But now the memory has surfaced. It refused to stay hidden. It happened one winter night, much like this one, cold and silent. I was desperate, hungry, and angry at the world. And that's when I saw the house. Big 2 stories, warm light spilling out through the windows. It looked like the kind of place that wouldn't miss a few valuables. I don't even remember making the decision. One moment I was walking past, and the next I was inside. The door hadn't been locked. I told myself that was fate, that I wasn't really breaking in if the door was unlocked. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. I didn't take much. A watch from the mantelpiece, a few small trinkets that looked expensive. I wasn't greedy. I just needed enough to get through the week. But as I was leaving, an alarm went off. I panicked. I bolted, running out the back door and into the night. I didn't get far before I saw the flashing lights. Police cars pulled up to the house just as I ducked into an alleyway, my heart pounding like a drum. And that's when I saw him, guy, maybe 18 or 19, walking down the street with headphones on. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police stopped him, asked him questions. He looked confused and scared. I watched from the shadows as they handcuffed him and put him in the back of their car. I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. Even now, I can't remember his name. The newspaper said he was a college student studying engineering. He swore he didn't do it, but the evidence was against him. His fingerprints were on the front door. He said it was from delivering a package a few days earlier, but it didn't matter. The cops needed someone to blame, and he was convenient. I told myself it wasn't my fault. I hadn't forced the cops to arrest him. I hadn't planted his fingerprints on the door. Maybe he committed some other crime. No. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I'd done was terrible. And now my name was in that book. I didn't even realize I'd started driving until I saw the city lights come into you. The streets were quiet, the snow muffling everything. I parked in front of the sheriff's station, my stomach churning. My breath fogged up the windshield as I sat there, staring at the building. The clock on my dashboard read 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until midnight. Maybe I could just outrun this thing. Maybe I could pass the curse along to someone else. No, I grabbed the book, shoved it into my coat, and got out of the car. The cold hit me like a snap, but I barely felt it. My legs felt like lead as I climbed the steps to the station. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty lobby. Behind the counter sat Sheriff Carter, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a tired face. He looked up from his coffee and newspaper, his brow furrowing. "Hey, Patrick, what are you doing here?" "This light?" I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to someone about something I did." His eyes narrowed. "Well, what? What kind of something?" "It's complicated." I hesitated, then blurted. "There was a break-in years ago, a house on Willow Street. Someone was arrested for it, but it wasn't them. It was me." The room felt colder. Sheriff Carter leaned back in his chair. His expression is unreadable. "That's a hell of a confession to walk in with, Patrick. You realize you're accusing yourself of a felony, right?" "I know. I don't care. I just need to set it right." The sheriff stared at me for a long moment, then sighed and picked up the phone. "All right, well, stay right there." It didn't take long for them to bring him in. His name was Jason Daniels. I recognized him immediately, even after all these years. He was older now, his face hardened by time and bitterness. He walked into the station with a weary expression, his shoulders hunched like he was bracing for a fight. When his eyes landed on mine, they narrowed, my throat dry. I spoke. "I'm the one who broke into that house. The one on Willow Street. You were innocent." The room went silent. Sheriff Carter leaned against the wall, watching with a frown. Jason's expression didn't change for a moment. And then he laughed. "You're kidding, right? After all these years, you just waltz in here and confess. Am I supposed to thank you? You ruined my life." "I know," I said quietly. "I'm sorry. Sorry, do you have any idea what I went through? What did my family go through? The trial, the fines, the whispers every time I walked down the street. They kicked me out of school. Did you know that? I couldn't even get a job for years because of you. I know I should have come forward back then, but I was scared and I was selfish." Jason stared at me, his hands balled into fist for a moment. I thought he was going to hit me, and I wouldn't have blamed him if he did, but instead, he turned away, shaking his head. Sheriff Carter cleared his throat. "Well, Patrick, if you're serious about this, you're going to have to make a full statement. And Jason here has every right to press charges." Jason didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the floor. His face darkened. "Why are you telling me this now? How do you think this makes it better? You think saying sorry fixes what you did to me?" I replied. "I don't expect you to forgive me." Jason stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "What do you think that's going to do for me? What's done is done." He wasn't wrong, and the truth of his words cut deep. Sheriff Carter cleared his throat, cutting through the tense silence. All right, Jason, why don't we step back for a second? Patrick's making a confession, and we're going to take this seriously. You have every right to be upset, but let me deal with the legal side of things, okay? Fair. Sheriff Carter grabbed the notebook and a pen, gesturing for me to follow him. Jason didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at me like he couldn't decide whether to yell at me through the walkout. Finally, he pushed himself out of his chair and walked out the door. The station was quiet after Jason left. Sheriff Carter sat me down in one of the small interview rooms, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He asked me to recount everything: the break-in, the stolen items, the false arrest. I told him everything I could remember. It wasn't until the sheriff left the room to make some calls that I noticed it. Two glowing red orbs hovered just outside the frosted glass window. At first, I thought they might be distant car lights reflecting in the snow, but they didn't move. They just stayed there, unmoving, burning through the glass with a steady intensity. And then I realized what I was looking at. Krampus. He was watching me. And then the red glow shifted, blinked, and he disappeared. It's been 3 months since that night. The trial's set to start next week. My lawyer, wiry man named Tom Grayson, has already told me not to get my hopes up. The evidence is damning. My confession, the timeline, and the stolen items I turned over after finding them buried in the back of my closet. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Patrick, Tom said the other day. The jury's not going to like you. You let an innocent kid take the fall while you just went about your life. We can argue for leniency, but I'm not sure it's going to make all that big of a difference. He was right. Jason Daniels had already gone on record about the impact my crime had on his life. I'd read the statement, the humiliation, the anger, the opportunities lost. I'd wrecked his future before he even had a chance to begin. And now, all these years later, I couldn't undo that damage. Truth is, my chances don't look great. The prosecutor's gunning for a maximum sentence, and I can't say I don't deserve it. But even knowing all that, there's a strange sense of calm in me. For the first time in my life, I'm not running from what I did. But yeah, life is a mess now, to be honest. The librarian job's gone. The town's gossip network lit up like fireworks the moment my arrest hit the papers. My neighbors avoid me. Even the barista at the local coffee shop struggles to meet my eye. Rupert, my cat, still knocks things off the counter, oblivious to the chaos around him. He's the only one who hasn't changed. Most days I think about Krampus, about why he spared me. I don't know what made him cross my name off that list. Maybe it was a confession. Maybe it was punishment I'd set in motion for myself. Or maybe he just enjoys watching people squirm under the weight of their own guilt. Either way, I saw him do it. Just before he disappeared into the shadows outside the sheriff's station that night, he pulled out the book. I'll never forget the way his claws moved over the page, swift and deliberate, as he crossed my name off the list. It was a mercy. Not really. It was a warning. I think about that night every time I see the book. Yeah, I still have it. Somehow it ended up in my house again, resting neatly on my kitchen table. Like a bad dream that refuses to fade. I try to get rid of it, burning it, burying it, even throwing it in the river. But no matter what I do, it always finds its way back to me. And then there was the letter. It arrived a week after the confession. No return address, no stamp, just an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 words scrolled in blood-red ink. It was a poem called The Eternal List. It read, "The naughty list is carved in fate. It's an ink of shadows, cold as hate. A single rule, both clear and dire. Stay far away or face the fire." At the very bottom of the letter, it said, "Yes, be good, Patrick, or else." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I knew exactly who it was from. There's a lot I don't know about what happened that night. I don't know if Krampus is some kind of demon, a twisted enforcer of justice, or something beyond human understanding. I don't know why he chooses the people he does, or how he decides who lives and who dies. I don't even know if I'll ever truly be free of him. But here's the truth, the part I've wrestled with every night since that awful winter. I'm thankful for Krampus. I don't know if that makes me a bad person, but without him, I don't think I'd ever have faced what I did. I'd have kept lying to myself, hiding from my guilt, pretending I was better than I was. My life's a lot different now, a lot of it worse, but at least for once I did the right thing. Krampus gave me a second chance. A terrible, terrifying chance, but a chance nonetheless. As I sit here writing this, the book is on the table next to me. The leather feels colder than it used to be. The page is heavier. The list is shorter now, but not gone. It never will be. Somewhere, someone else is reading their name for the first time, feeling the same dread I felt when I saw mine. I don't know if Krampus will ever come back for me. Maybe he will. Maybe I'll slip up, lose my way again, and find myself back on the naughty list. But until then, I'm going to try to do good. That's all I can do. The Blackwell Insane Asylum, later renamed the Blackwell Psychiatric Hospital, was founded by Ashton Blackwell in 1822. It remained in operation until 1986, after which it was shut down and the building fell to the Blackwell family, specifically Roger Blackwell. Roger turned the building, the source of countless rumors in the surrounding town, into a historical landmark, closed to the public except during events such as Halloween or the anniversary of its opening. However, these events became few and far between as Blackwell grew old and senile. In 2016, Roger Blackwell passed, leaving the property to his grandson me. My name is Max Blackwell, and for years I'd heard the rumors surrounding my family's asylum. I'm in my 20s, and always being a bit of an urban explorer, I decided to finally enter the hospital. That's where this story starts. The gate was easy enough to get past. Putting the key in the rusted padlock, I was surprised it even opened the lock anymore. The gate was solid and heavy, fitting in a way for a monolithic structure behind it. The hospital, when first constructed, had 6 floors. By the time it was shut down, it had 20. The building was constructed over heavy stone, with later additions being made with concrete and steel. Opening the large wooden doors, they creaked open, revealing a damp odor. In his later years, my grandfather stopped caring for the property, so it had fallen into disrepair. Looking for a light switch on the wall, I tentatively flicked it on. The lights flickered to life, again surprising me considering the age of the place. Still, I come armed with a durable flashlight, just in case. Despite my granddad's efforts, graffiti covered the walls. Layers of dust covered every surface. A reception desk, half rotted away, sat front and center of the lobby area with a large staircase behind it. To the right of the larger staircase was a descending one leading to, I guess, the basement. Holding my breath, I went downward. The basement was dark, extremely so. My flashlight barely made a dent in the darkness, brightening the area just enough I could see a few feet ahead of me. Walking forward, carefully watching where I stepped, I could make out a door frame and a sign next to it. Wiping the dust away, I read the word archive. The door, or what was left of it, barely hung on the hinges. I looked around on the wall of the archive room and found a light switch. I turned it on and the lights buzzed to life. Before me were dozens of filing cabinets. Blackwell, as I said, was open for a century and a half, give or take. So it had hundreds of patients. More interestingly, there were boxes all labeled patient interviews. Besides what I told you earlier, I know next to nothing about the history of the hospital, so all this definitely had me interested. Next, after leaving the basement, I returned to the lobby area and went upstairs. The second and third floors were mostly the offices of staff and areas for basic evaluations. Floor 4 was an infirmary for more self-destructive patients and staff injury. As the years went on, staff injury rates apparently spiked, leading to the eventual closing of the hospital. Floor 4 is also notorious for another reason. Legend says that illegal medical experiments were conducted on patients here, as well as lobotomies, to pacify the more violent patients. I'll admit, I believe the lobotomies part, but the illegal experiment stuff is total bull. If you ask me, that is. Floor 5 was the staff cafeteria and quarters. Oftentimes staff would need to be on call 6 days a week, so staff often lived here. Floor 6 was patient quarters and recreation for the more docile patients. You know, like schizophrenics, senile people, or people who thought they were I don't know, Benjamin Franklin, something Granddad called the harmless kind of crazy. He never much cared for the mentally ill. That said, in his early years, this wasn't the case. Construction on floor 7 began in 1831. Before then, patient intake was relatively low, but the more disturbed individuals were kept on floor 6, with floor 5 being the more docile patients. In the 9-year period between the initial construction and the addition of floors 7 and 8, there were 17 suicides. Only 13 were patients. Floors 7 and 8, as mentioned previously. It was constructed in 1831 and was for more violent patients. Each floor contained 15 cells, 30 total. Floor 7 had cells 1 through 15 and 16 through 30 were on floor 8. The walls, or the ones not caved in or broken down of each cell, were spattered in long dried blood and scratch marks. I guess no amount of cleaning could get rid of the stains. Or maybe the staff didn't care enough. Neither seemed plausible. Floors 10 through 15 began construction in 1859. 10, 11, and 12 contained more padded cells. These were much more intact. One cell contained drawings of dozens of eyes. Another was covered in numbers written on every wall. Another still had the phrases "I see you watching" and "the hunger from the void calls" written dozens of times. You get the idea. 13 was, as of 1932, used for electroconvulsive therapy. Before then, it was home to experimental forms of therapy. At least that's what the legend says. Truth be told, most of floor 13 was destroyed in a fire in 1875, not longer after its completion. It only really regained use in 1915, where it was used to treat symptoms of shell shock, now called post-traumatic stress disorder, in World War I. 14 and 15 were both dedicated to more traditional forms of therapy, psychoanalysis, that sort of thing. Floors 16 through 20 were completed in 1953. While the officially given history says it was for a new influx of patients after World War II's end, truthfully, it was to treat suspected communists. This included lobotomies and ECT. I'm not comfortable discussing it because, frankly, I'm ashamed and disgusted that my family was involved in such things. The only exception was floor 20, which was used for staff meetings and meetings of the board of directors that ran the place. Anyway, that was the end of my exploration of the building, your typical creepy asylum. The real reason I've written all of this was to give you an idea of this place's history. Not long after that initial entry, I had some people get the place's power up and running. I've read a lot of the old patient files, and decided to share them here. See, I thought I knew this place's history, but there was so much more. Here are a few. File name, patient 322, name Jonathan Francis. Day of admission, May 15, 1825. Diagnosis, paranoia-induced madness. Reason for admission. On the 17th of April, Mr. Francis butchered his daughter, wife, as well as their neighbors, one Jacob Friedman and Margaret Friedman. Mr. Francis insists they communed with the devil by means of the family dog. Upon arrest by authorities, Francis had hung the dog on a cross outside of the family home. He was sent to us upon sentencing from a court. Recommendation for treatment isolation from other patients. The patient is to be fed, but interaction is forbidden. Staff are permitted to harm patients in order to get decorum from the patient. Patient 465, name Matthew Latson. Date of admission, June 15, 1825. Diagnosis, paranoia-induced madness. Reasons for admission, attempted murder of a lawyer from Illinois. Claimed it was to prevent some great calamity of brother fighting brother. Recommendation for treatment, chemically induced tranquil state. Injection into the front of the brain daily. Patient 2201, name unknown, date of admission, July 23, 1878, diagnosis under investigation. Reasons for admission. Patient claims to be under the influence of a deity he refers to as the Void. Subject murdered 15 men, women, and children over the span of 6 days, in tribute to this being 7 days after admission. The patient caught fire through unknown means and jumped from the roof. File name, patient 5201, name Abraham Johnson. Date of admission, July 18, 1883. Diagnosis unknown. Reason for admission claims to feel something scraping the inside of his skull. Attempted to cut it out with a hunting knife, resulting in his admission to the asylum. Recommendation for treatment none. Shove him in a box and forget. File name patient 21002. Name Constance Blackwell. Date of admission January 22nd, 1915. Diagnosis madness. None. Admitted under recommendation by Director Blackwell. Locked away in isolation cell 32. The subject is to be beaten and held in ice water if she makes too much noise. This one gave me pause for two reasons. Constance Blackwell was the daughter-in-law of Ashton N. Blackwell. And secondly, there were no isolation cells beyond 30, so I thought anyway. I read through these for hours. There were thousands. Anyway, after all of that, I'm staying here overnight tonight. For now, though, I'm going to get some sleep. I'll need my energy tonight. Update. I found that Shelley was in the basement area, planning to search through the archives for any details when I heard a thumping noise. It was coming from behind a wall. I grabbed a heavy piece of lumber, fallen from years of disrepair, and caved in the wall, masking the sound. That's when I saw fluorescent light in the hall. There were 13 cells with a person in each living people. The 13 people in the cells are 6 women, 6 men, and one of indeterminate gender. Their hair is overgrown, and their clothes look as though they haven't been washed in years. The cell numbers have faded, but not vanished. They're numbered 31 to 43. I can't find files on the people within and don't have a key to their cells, frankly. I don't know how they got there. Blueprints of the building show that the cell block shouldn't exist. Cell number 31 is a padded cell with a black-haired individual inside. They always face the back right corner of the cell, and I can hear them softly murmuring to themselves. They're bound in a barely held together straight jacket with S. Kemper on the back of the jacket. I thought it'd be a name, but found no one named Kemper with a first name starting with S in the files. The room smells awful from what I can tell, with thousands of tally marks lining the walls. Cell number 32 is decorated with light furnishings, a sofa, a table, and mirror, and a tea set specifically inside. Is a brown-haired woman in a ratty, filthy Victorian-era dress. From what I can tell, she's always brushing her hair with a phantom brush inside of her cell or drinking tea. Cell number 33 had what I thought at first glance was one person. However, the person within has a small conjoined twin. Infant-sized, attached to her chest, or rather stitched to it. The cell is bare, only holding a small bed and blanket. I've never seen the larger twin's face, as it's always obscured by her messy hair. The conjoined infant on her chest, however, always seems to catch my glance whenever I pass by. Cell number 34 had a man in modern doctor scrubs covered in dried blood and gore. There was no furniture in the room, but a wooden chair. He waved at me as I looked in. Cell number 35 was a woman bound in a straitjacket in a padded room. She continuously headbutts the wall, giggling to herself occasionally. She screams, and even rarer she speaks. On one occasion, I heard her say, "Make me better," over and over again. Her head is wrapped in a bloody, dirty fabric. Cell number 36 was completely dark, save a flickering bulb in the center of the room. An elderly woman sat within, and even compared to the rest, she was filthy. The floor of her cell was coated in a reddish-brown substance, which I only saw when the bulb briefly lit up the room. She never strayed far from the light, allowing me to see brief glimpses of her. She wore a filthy bathrobe, slippers, and nothing underneath if you've ever seen The Shining. She was like the woman in room 237, but covered in dirt and grime. Cell number 37's occupant had electrodes on his scalp, with the dangling wires occasionally sparking. He tried to grab me as I passed by his cell, begging me to make the voices stop. His teeth were rotten, almost black, and his breath stunk of rot. So much so I could smell it feet away from him. He scratched desperately at the iron door separating us, trying to grab the handle. I noticed as he did this his lack of fingernails. He wore an orange jumpsuit with the words Blackwell Psychiatric on the back. Cell number 38's door had no window. The only reason I know anyone's in there is because I can hear a man pounding at the door and yelling obscenities for locking him in here with it, and how you get John for this. Cell number 39 had a young boy wearing a red cape and pajamas. He stared at me with dead eyes behind black hair. His room was covered in newspaper clippings over the typical padding of an asylum cell. He creeped me out more than the others for a reason I can't place, so I didn't look long. Cell number 40 was a morbidly obese man strapped to the wall. His cell was splattered with dried blood and bones. He grinned with yellow teeth as he noticed me. He said something in a foreign language, maybe French, and struggled against his restraints. Cell number 41 was a man who, I shit you not, was a dead ringer for Fox News broadcaster Tucker Carlson. He was the most stereotypical lunatic. Straitjacket, savage screaming, and spouting nonsense about Democrats and how they wanted to eat our souls. The most unsettling thing was how his eyes were both covered with gauze. His straitjacket had its back collar ripped away at the back, and Commie Trader was branded into his flesh. Cell number 42 was covered wall to wall. In names, written in what looked like blood. In the center of the madness was a woman, quietly muttering to herself. She was saying random numbers and rocking back and forth. She looked in my direction, and I could make out her eyes were milky white. She then changed to a different set of numbers, and she occasionally said my name. Cell number 43, finally, was an emaciated woman. Her head was shaved, completely bald. She looked like she hadn't eaten in weeks. Her skeleton's frame was clearly visible. She looked up at me as I passed, and I noticed a small wound just above her eye. Food? Time for food? She said in a trembling voice. She tried to come to the door, but was shackled to the wall. It was as she did. The lights in the hall died. I heard Mad laughing as they did, and one of the men said gleefully, "We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you." In a sing-song voice, I ran down the hall as fast as I could, out of the basement, and locked the door shut behind me. I turned around to face what should have been the lobby area, but instead found myself in a bright white corridor on what looked to be the 4th floor. It seemed cleaner, with the walls absolutely spotless. I heard screaming from down the hall, and against my better judgment, ran to the source. It was a patient medical treatment room. I swung the door open, and I saw nothing. It was the same disheveled, abandoned room scattered with rat shit that I'd seen on previous excursions. With one change, a bed was in the center of the room. The bed looked freshly made, with what appeared to be new leather restraints on the sides. In the center of the bed was an identification bracelet given to patients upon being admitted. The label read patient number 53,266M. Blackwell. Date of admittance 03/2020. I turned around and found myself facing the front lobby. I went out the front door of the building, and I found myself waking up in the basement area outside of the hidden room. I slipped and hit my head in the darkness after the blackout. I breathed a sigh of relief. This relief was short-lived, however, as I noticed the ID bracelet on my wrist. I managed to get home for now. I'm going to bed, even though it's nearly 2 a.m. at the time of writing. I'll update you guys later. Hey, everyone. Max here. I'm alive for better or for worse. Since my last post, I took the liberty of having a security system, including cameras, installed on the property. My family, while not exactly billionaires, is still quite wealthy, so it wasn't a hassle expenses-wise. Besides my weird experience on the 4th floor, I wanted to make sure no one was going to break in. With all the urban legends surrounding Blackwell, the place was a bit of a rite of passage for teens, daring their friends to break into the old asylum and bring back some items related to the hospital's dark history. With my discovery in the basement, coupled with my efforts to actually clean the place as best I could, it was in my best interest and that of any would-be trespassers to keep them out. I've been avoiding the 4th floor ever since my experience there. Dream or not, there wasn't a chance I was going there alone again. I spend most nights here now in the basement. I've had the place furnished, and now it's a man cave of sorts. Before any furnishing or man cave making, I erected a door between the basement and the hidden cell block, which I took to calling the Phantom Zone. After Superman comics, I put a heavy padlock on the door just to be safe. At night, some of them scream from within their prisons for hours at a time. They bang on the door, hurl obscenities, and yell promises of pain to come my way. During these, I venture once again to the other floors. I noticed over the past few days that the upper levels tend to be active at night, phantom chains rattle into cell blocks, or the temperature dropping by several degrees in the staff quarters. At least twice, I've seen the silhouette of a hanging body dangling precariously from a ceiling fixture. Of course, when I look at where the shadow is being cast from, I find nothing. The worst area, however, is floor 13. Ironic, I know. I hear screams, laughter, and crying from within the cells of floor 13 some nights. I feel a phantom hand clutch my shoulder as I walk past the darkened rooms. And the worst part is the smell, sizzling flesh and copper. Occasionally, I'd see flashes of light from one of the rooms on floor 13. When I'm not walking the grounds, I'm in the archives. I've read many of the files contained here, the ones not destroyed by age, water, or rats anyway. In 1919, a man suffering from shell shock murdered his family, claiming a specter of war forced him to do so. He was sent here for treatment after a court ruled him insane and unfit for trial. In 1956, a man suffering from Rett syndrome, i.e. a suspected communist, was treated with electroconvulsive therapy and later a full frontal lobotomy. During the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, the hospital also treated sufferers of the H1N1 virus. By the hospital's own count, over 1,000 people succumbed to the illness. Then there were the patient interviews. Most of the interviews were harmless enough, just a rudimentary checkup. But others, well, I'll just let you read for yourself. Here's a transcript of one interview transcript. This is Dr. Samuel Andrews of the Blackwell Psychiatric Hospital. The date is October 14, 1934. I am interviewing Joseph King, sent to Blackwell due to a psychosis of indeterminate origin. Good morning, Mr. King. The patient remains silent. All right then, Joseph. At the end of our last session, you mentioned a living shadow. I'd like you to elaborate on that. Watching. Always watching. I beg your pardon. It watches, always watches, never stops, never blinks. I see. Could you describe this shadow for me? Oh, it looks like a man, but has no face. Made of the night sky. It stands at the edge of nothing and everything, and it's always watching. How long have you seen this shadow, Joseph? Since I was a babe. It was always watching me. Never spoke. Just watched. When's the last time you saw it? Oh, it's there. It's there now. Where, dear? Andrews begins to gurgle, and the sound of a snap, like a bone being broken, is heard. Joseph King begins laughing. I guess I was hungry. There's sounds of meat being eaten, followed by shouting 10 minutes later. The interview concludes with a new voice. The cause of death was the breaking of the neck at the base of the skull. We still don't know how Joseph King did it, as he was in restraints when we found him. He claims a shadow did it. I recommend electroconvulsive therapy, and if no improvement is seen within 3 months or so, euthanasia. I shall bring this to Director Blackwell at once. We're still looking for the missing parts of Dr. Andrews. The tape ends there. After hearing this, I did some digging through the archives, but found no records of Joseph King having ever been treated here. Oh, I managed to get the elevator working, so no more having to walk flights of stairs to patrol each floor. Gotta find silver linings, you know? Also helps me keep the place somewhat clean. I was up on floor 5 getting some sleep when I was awoken by a loud crash, then a blood-curdling scream. I ran out of the former staff quarters to the hall and found myself once again in a stark white hallway. This time, however, I was on floor 13, as indicated by a plaque by the door leading to the stairwell. A figure wearing a nurse's uniform exited the room behind me. I assume it was a woman, but her face was smudged, for lack of a better term. It was like someone had painted her, then smeared her face with her thumb. It's hard to describe. She grabbed my arm roughly, and it was then I noticed I was in a patient gown. Screams filled the hall as she led me to the elevator. I found myself unable to break away from her grip. The doors opened, revealing 2 more figures, seemingly large males. They forcibly shoved me on a gurney and tightened the restraints so much. I could feel my wrists start to bleed from the pressure. She pressed a button. Floor 4. The elevator began descending, and the beings began conversing. I can't understand what they said. It's like they were spouting gibberish with inflections of tone indicating conversation. The elevator dinged, indicating we arrived at our destination. She wheeled me out with aid from the two men. They led me down the hall and turned me into a medical office. Another figure in a blood-spattered apron and lab coat nodded towards the nurse and the men, who then left. He then said something to me, or I think he did. It was more gibberish. He picked up a small metal spike and hammer from a table. I heard more screams, but now they were mixed in with laughter. He placed the spike above my eyebrow. I struggled. I begged him to stop, but he either didn't hear me or didn't care. He brought the hammer down, and I felt the spike pierce my skull. I let out a scream. The pain stopped, but I felt blood trickle down my forehead. I was back in the room on floor 5, standing upright. My clothes were replaced by a dirty, barely held together patient gown. I began running down to the basement to grab my stuff I was going to leave right then, but I paused in the midst of my panic. I felt a breeze and heard the giggles of the 13. The door was open. I locked it shut. I was sure of that. I looked into the room for any signs of intruders, but the hall and its cells were untouched, or so I thought. Because as I investigated and made sure all the cells were locked, I noticed cell number 34, while still locked, was empty. I didn't bother to investigate further. I ran up the stairs of the basement and flung the front door open with all of my might. But instead of seeing the skyline of the town below, I instead found myself staring down a stark white corridor. I almost vomited and felt my heart beating rapidly. My phone began ringing, bringing me out of my fear-induced haze. It was an unknown caller. Hesitantly, I put the phone to my ear, hearing raspy breathing as I did so. "Hello." My own voice responded. "There's no way out." Then it hung up. The front door slammed shut in front of me. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I slammed all of my weight against the door, but nothing. I was trapped. I pounded desperately on the door, screaming for help. I tried calling 911, but the line was busy. I haven't slept since then because I know I'm not alone here. If you guys have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. I don't know what to do. My phone's battery is getting low, so I'll update you guys later. The place still has power, so I can at least charge it. Silver linings, right? Day 2 of being trapped in Blackwell. Or I assume it's day 2. According to my phone, 11 a.m. But the sun hasn't come up. I haven't slept since last night. I've holed up into floor 9. It has no dark history as far as I'm aware. I've rationed what little food I had, but I still only have enough for a few days at most. Occasionally, I'll hear doors slam or a scream from another floor. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'll see movement. A shadow that isn't there, or a flash of blue light. I'll hear a voice whisper, helpless in my ear. I've seen cell number 34's escapee, who I've taken to calling doc. He walks the halls, humming a tune to himself. He occasionally says something to himself, but I can never understand it. Today, when I was using the elevator, I noticed there were now 25 floors according to the elevator buttons. I'm still debating going to those floors. That's not the only change. By my count, there are now 150 cells on floors 7 and 8, 300 in total, all empty. The stairwell connecting each floor, meanwhile, seems downright endless, and I can hear a young girl crying at the bottom. I can still use it too. Traverse the building, but it loops, it seems like. I've gone down 30 flights today, and once I hit the bottom floor, it looped back to floor 25. I stepped out at floor 20 and went down via elevator. I'm going to try to get some rest on floor 9. Sorry to cut this update short. Max here. Sorry, I didn't realize how many days it had been since I posted here. It flows differently. I'm still stuck in this damned asylum. Some of you think it's some otherworldly force carrying out vengeance on my family through me. And well, I haven't entirely discredited that theory in my head. What food I had is almost gone. Some of it has started to spoil. The building's heating system doesn't turn on anymore, and it gets cold here at night like a meat locker. I made a controlled fire in the staff kitchen to keep warm, using paper some old planks, and an oven's flame. Two more cells are empty now, specifically cells 31 and 38. Curiosity got the better of me, and upon seeing the windowless cell number 38's door open, I peeked in. The walls of the room were coated with blood, entrails, and slash marks in the wall's padding. In the center was a mutilated corpse, missing all of its skin. When I exited the room, a blood trail dragged down the hall like someone was moving a body. I could swear it wasn't there before I entered the room. I found cell number 31's occupant not long after. He sat in a corner of the elevator. He didn't seem to acknowledge my presence. The lights flickered. They suddenly went out for a split second, and he was gone when they came back on. I felt a burning sensation in my forearm, a stabbing pain, like I had it in an oven coil. In my arm were 4 deep cuts. They formed a word, high. They didn't bleed despite their depth, but they hurt like hell. I felt faint and leaned against the wall of the elevator. I rested my eyes a moment and heard a faint ding. I didn't recall pressing the button, but stepped out of the elevator regardless, just wanting to get off. This was a mistake I soon realized as I gazed upon the stark white hall before me. I turned around to get back on the elevator, but only found a wall. Painted on it in black lettering was the number 21. I turned around, gulping, and faced the hall. There were no people. Unlike last time, these had faces. They were all in patient gowns. Some of them had their scalps peeled back, revealing brain matter. Others had small holes above their eyebrow, leaking blood. All of them had a black fluid leaking from the holes where their eyes should have been, and they were all facing me, not moving or making any noise. I tentatively stepped down the hall, walking through the group. They never took their eyes off me. As I continued, the black liquid started pooling at their feet. They numbered in the hundreds, stretching down the hall for miles. An overwhelming sense of dread began to well in my chest as they started muttering among themselves. I began moving faster as the fluid began filling the floor, individual puddles merging with each other. I heard movement behind me, and I broke out into a sprint. It was up to my ankles now. The inmates began talking louder, speaking in the same gibberish as the nurses. The black substance was halfway to my knees, and I began struggling to keep up a quick pace. How long was this hall? It was at my knees now, and it was like tree sap, sticky and hard to move through. It was like the deeper it got, the thicker it was. It got to my thigh, and I could barely move at all. The faces of my family's passed, staring me down at my waist, and it was like mud. I began feeling claustrophobic as it rose further. I couldn't move or breathe at this point. It was at my neck now, and I felt hands dragging me under. I kicked at them, or tried to at least, but it was for nothing. I felt it entering my mouth and nostrils, and the world around me began to fade. I suddenly fell to the ground, gasping and clawing for air. I could see. I could breathe. I quickly sat up and took in my surroundings. I was in the basement. I steadied my breath and let out a sigh of relief. Was that a dream? It felt so real. I took the stairs up to floor 9 and froze as I opened the door. On the walls of the hall, written hundreds of times, was a phrase I couldn't understand. There was a hole here. It's gone now that was written on the walls, floor, and ceiling. Every square inch of the hall of floor 9 contained that phrase. A door at the end of the hall creaked open, and S. Kemper, as their straitjacket identified them as, crawled out on all fours. The only thing was, he was on the ceiling. Their jackets had been untied, rolled up sleeves revealing clawed hands. From the distance I was at, I couldn't tell if those were their fingernails or talons. I stepped backward to leave, and the floor creaked. The being looked up and cocked its head. Kemper jumped from the ceiling to the floor below, landing on all fours and then standing up. It grinned, curling back, thin lips, revealing sharpened yellow teeth. The lights began to flicker and suddenly shattered, raining glass around us. Kemper began sprinting towards me, and I quickly ran in the hall and slammed the door in its face. It stared through the window at me, and even this close, I couldn't make out the features of its face. It scratched the glass, spelling the word high. It then licked the glass, revealing a long black tongue. It rattled the handle, and I was broken from my trance. I ran down the stairs, hearing the glass of the window of the door shatter as I descended. That was yesterday. I haven't seen Kemper since then, but I found slash marks on walls and ceilings. I haven't seen the doctor at all, or who or whatever was in cell number 38. I've taken to sleeping in a locked cell, only coming out during the day. I'm almost out of food and I'm getting hungry. I've been sleeping, but I feel like I haven't slept in days. Tomorrow I have to go to a floor above 20. Maybe there will be supplies there. Or maybe this place is finally getting to me. It's hard to tell anymore. How long have I been here? Days? Weeks? I don't know. My phone says it's April 5th, but it feels longer than that. Like I said, time flows differently here. Or at least it seems to. I think I'm going to get some sleep. Update. It's now April 7th. I'm still alive, at least I'm pretty sure. I was woken up by a loud slam. The noise was from somewhere above where I slept in the basement. I went up to the lobby, and I saw it was the front door. It was open cautiously. I looked out and saw the front gate. Quickly, I ran out, pushing through the gate. I never driven so fast in my life. I was laughing and crying as I pulled into my driveway. I quickly ran up the front steps of my home, unlocked the door, and swung it open. I ran inside, up the stairs to my bathroom. The first thing on my mind was a shower, a nice hot shower. I swung the bathroom door open and began to draw the water. I turned to look in the mirror and froze. The room behind me wasn't in the reflection. In fact, neither was I. No, the image in the mirror was that of the hospital's reception area. I turned around and found myself facing the reception desk. I started to laugh because that's when I knew I was going to die here. I was trapped in this hell constructed by my ancestors, and I was going to die here. This place would never let me leave, at least not alive. The entrance was still open, but now led to another hall. Taking a breath, I stepped into the hall. The door slammed shut behind me, locking again. At the end of the hall was the reception area, but now clean and seemingly new. A woman sat behind it, filing her teeth. She gestured to me. To step forward, she spoke as I did so. Now, little one, you don't belong in this place. There was a hole here. It's gone now.